He's in my bed. Oh, 708. Yeah. No, I want to sit down. 708.
Sound like my medicine already. I walk up there when I'm in the knee. Me too. You gotta take that medicine.
Oh, yeah, I got it. What? I gave you. I got it. All right. Oh, I got it now.
for the Finance Committee meeting on Thursday, September 13th, 2018 at 5:14 p.m. And we will call the roll. Trustee House.
Present.
Trustee Henyard.
Present.
Trustee Muhammad here, and we have a quorum. And following the agenda, we'll stand please for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then followed by prayer by Chief Collins.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, if you would continue standing. Chief Collins, if you would lead us into prayer, please, with all heads bowed, and follow him in silence.
If everyone could please bow your heads. Heavenly Father, above everything else, we want to give thanks to you. We thank you for your blessings. We thank you for your gifts. We thank you for the gift of life. We thank you for our ability to get through each day with you leading the way. We thank you for the many gifts and the blessings that we don't know about. We pray for a productive meeting, and we pray for safe passage for all to get back home safely to their loved ones. In the mighty, precious name of Jesus Christ, amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Chief, for that beautiful prayer. We're going to turn this around a little bit. We're going to start out with the discussion of the transition plan, which was actually a concern of Trustee House, and we'll address that. And the following four concerns.
Speak directly to the mic, please.
The following four concerns. Identifying, he was concerned, have we identified the Public Works Manager, the HR Generalist, and media consultant positions created by the amendment? We have not identified them, but we do have the job descriptions, and those particular positions will be going out via SSMMA website, the Village of Belton website.
Mike, please. Can't hear you back. Please. Thank you. Just close. Thank you.
Can you all hear me now? Can you hear me now? Let's try this out. Can everybody hear me now? Okay, great. I'll start that from the top. We had some concerns from one of the trustees concerning the transition because in the budget, as you may well know, that there were some cuts, and some more cuts will be continuing. And one of the concerns was identifying the PW manager, the Public Works Manager, the HR Generalist, and media consultant positions that were created by the amendment. And my response to that is we do have the descriptions, and we will be sending those posts out via the SSMMA, which is South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association. We also will put out a RFP for that position for the media consultant. The second concern we had was who will be assigned tasks currently being completed by staff that is eliminated permanently. We do have a person by the name of Janice Johnson. I use the term of interim village administrator, but that's not her title, but she's taken on the duties of that person along with human resources and a plethora of others. Number three concern was who will officially inform the eliminated staff of their termination and advise them on closeout benefits, which would be what's called an exit interview, such as COBRA, retirement funds, etc. And as we all know, that's an internal administrative responsibility. And again, that would probably be Ms. Janice Johnson on that out of the administrative office. Last, has a contract been drafted for positions that are moving to consultant status? If yes, can they be provided by the board? And all of this will be provided by the board, and this will also be discussed at our board meeting on September 17th. So if any trustees have any concerns concerning that, we can voice them now. If not, we'll go to the other part of the agenda, which is the budget ordinance.
I would just say, just briefly for the record, I'm receiving the information that's been identified. I would just be of the mindset or hope that we would have more firm people in place prior to doing it, as opposed to making the cuts and then looking for it. And I'll say specifically with the HR position, that's the person that does the recruiting, they do the hiring, they do the COBRA. So if we eliminate that position and then do a move forward, it will make it more challenging to do the recruiting, the recruitment and the closeout as well for other employees. In terms of the COBRA, and I know Ms. Johnson is talented, I think that we want to make sure that we've at least had a conversation with her to make sure that she's ready to take on those additional responsibilities.
Yes, I appreciate that, Trustee. And Ms. Johnson has been talked to by myself. And just for the edification of everyone, Ms. Johnson has been doing this before we had a human resources person. She did this at the Old Village along with the other young lady named Sandra. I can't remember her last name. She has a very extensive background in human resources. She did it along with Stan Urban, the former village administrator, so she's well aware. And we also have some outside sources that will be helping her in the insurance department to help her with this until we get a HR generalist. Any other concerns? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the response.
Any trustee? You know? Okay, so we'll go to item A, which is the appropriation and budget ordinance. What I asked Ms. Redmond, our finance manager, is to have the department heads to come forward, because we also asked for a 10% reduction, non-personnel related in their respective departments. So, Chief, did you want to go first if you're prepared? If we could have the chief. Do we have any others outside of Public Works? I see media is here, and who else? Any other department heads? Water? Okay. Chief, it's all yours.
Okay, to begin with, we started reducing in last year's budget also. So we're almost at bare bones on certain things. And just to give you an example, I did mention to Yvonne when I did have a meeting with her that a lot of the police department budget can't be cut, but some of it can. But I did make further recommendations that I did tell her I would discuss tonight, such as, I'll give you an example, travel expenses, which is line 562. I have that budgeted out at $3,000. Prior to that, I had it budgeted out at $5,000. But based on what we use it for, just give you an example, is one of our homicide suspects was actually captured in Minnesota. So when we work with the state's attorney's office, their protocol is you need to send someone out there to interview them before we even talk about extraditing them, which would be at the very least 2 detectives. So that's what our travel expenses, what we would pay that out of. But because of the unpredictable nature of when these types of things will happen, we are just basically guessing. So right now, my educated guess would be $1,500 as what our travel expenses may possibly be for the remainder of the fiscal year. So that was a cut that I also recommended, from going from $3,000 to $1,500. Another cut as far as training, just based on what we spent in training. What I budgeted for the year prior was $30,000 for training, and what our actual ended up being was 26 budget actual. So reducing it down to 25 is we would just make sure that we stay within that budget. So there will be certain classes that can't be taken, certain courses that we would just have to push off to the next year. So
Okay.
that's, go ahead, sir.
I'm sorry if I can interject. We're talking about line item, for everybody's concern, is line item number 563, training.
Correct.
And Ms. Redmond actually gave the budget to actuals, which is now $6,000. Do you think between now and April 30th, you will have spent that much in training in the next, was it 7 months?
No, not
So
$25,000.
You'll be well under that then.
So yeah, we would be well under that. So we would be willing to actually reduce that also.
Okay.
The next line item is 566, public education. And in a further reduction, we reduced that and brought it down to 4,000. This is mainly publications or any type of material that we would use for special events or any type of community policing events. But considering the status, or the state of the budget, I should say, is I would recommend that we also bring that down by half again. So instead of $4,000, even though it's on the current sheet as 4, I would recommend we bring that down to 2.
Okay, and Ms. Redmond is here, and I know you have probably the electronic version of this. Ms. Redmond. Oh, I'm sorry. So far, there is nothing budgeted year to date from this last one that I'm looking at. Do you see having that expenditure between now and April 30th? Because so far, there's been nothing spent on that particular line item.
Right, and we would at least like to keep something in the line item in case we have to do flyers for certain situations. If there's an emergency situation that we need to do flyers on, or any type of publication that we need to issue out to citizens.
Okay.
Chief, I got a question.
Yes.
Training, what does that consist of when you send them out for training? What type of training?
Training, well, I'll address it in 2 parts. First, there's state mandated training. The mandatory training of de-escalation training, crisis intervention training when you deal with people with mental crisis or any type of situation like that. Also, law update, anything that has to do with every year the legislators create new laws, and the new laws get issued and they usually go into effect the January 1st of the next year. So officers have to be updated on training. So we send them to training. There's training that's mandated by the state for deadly force, just so we can stay within the legal means of the Constitution and stay within policy. There's also training on hazardous materials, bloodborne pathogens. There's a litany of mandatory trainings. On top of that, we do send officers for training, such as if we don't have enough field training officers on a particular shift, we will designate one officer to go to a 40-hour class, which is the length of time for a field training officer course. And that course may, depending on the agency that we use, it may run from $150 to maybe even $500. It just depends on what's open at the time. Truck enforcement, we have to send officers for refresher courses. Officers that are certified to do DUIs, they have to take breathalyzer and they have to get recertified every year. There's taser training. Every year we have to recertify on that. So not only are we paying for the courses, but we also pay if it's a mandatory training on a certain day and the officer's off, we have to pay that officer overtime to attend that training, especially if it's mandatory.
So it sounds to me as though you need that. Why would you cut that?
I'm not trying to cut it below what we would actually need. I'm just predicting for the future that we probably would not go over that.
So you say you're not going to go over 25,000?
I would say we would not go over 25,000.
Okay, because I want our officers to have all the training.
As much training as we can. Yes. Now, we will continue to keep updated on the mandatory training. That just means some of the, I would just say, a la carte type of training, we would just have to start denying. So if an officer just decided they wanted to take additional gang enforcement training, it's not necessary, so we may or may not say yes to it. And if we're in a crisis, we'll probably say no this time. Let's wait till the next budgeting cycle.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Let me follow up with that question. If you could, Ms. Redmond, tell us what the actual, we budgeted for $25,000 for 19. What was the actuals for, I mean, up to now it's 18. Last year, on what was it for 17, 16 for that particular line item that Trustee Henry had a question on? What was actually spent the 2 previous years? And the actuals for those 2 years?
We're speaking on training?
Yes, ma'am. 563.
Okay, for training for fiscal year 17, the budget was $40,000. Actual was $18,439, spot 46. And the budget for fiscal year 18 was $30,000. We spent $26,974 even.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Did you want to continue, Chief Collins?
Yes, sir. And going down to line 659, informant and lineup expenses, and also included in that would be petty cash. And previously, for the previous budget year, I budgeted out $10,000, and that has been brought down to $6,000 as further trying to save more money.
Could you give us the actuals on the 17 and 18 you don't have thus far? Could you give us the previous 2 years on that line item?
Fiscal year 17, the budget was $1,000 and the actual was $80.
Okay, so you only spent $80. What year is this?
17.
Okay, and for the following year, which would be year to date, I don't see anything on that line item.
For fiscal year 18, the budget was $10,000 and it looks as though we spent $80,376.50.
Well, say that number again.
$80,376.50.
No, we're talking about line item. Are we talking about the same line?
Line
Informant
659?
line
659, correct.
Yeah, informant lineup expenses. Are you saying year to date we've spent how much for that particular?
For fiscal year 18, it was $80,376.50.
I'm not familiar with that number.
Could you explain that, please?
Sure,
That's awfully a
I'll
big
pull up the
jump.
detail.
And again, while she's looking it up, just give us an overview of what exactly that is, informant / lineup expenses
And also petty cash.
and petty
And
cash.
also petty cash. So obviously petty cash is just for those small expenses, such as if we need screws or whatever we need from the hardware store, just an example. Or if we're having a meeting and we need to buy a case of water or something like that, those type of expenses. Informants, and this has been a established practice over the last however many decades, that when you want information from people, sometimes you have to pay for it. So if you might have an informant out on the street that will give you information on maybe a drug house for $20 or so. But most of the time we use it for lineup expenses. So if we have a suspect in custody, the law is you have to have other people who similarly look like that person, and sometimes you just have to ask people off the street would they be willing to participate in the lineup, and usually we pay them $20 to participate.
There's nothing outside that perimeter?
Nothing outside that I know of, so I know we could not have spent anywhere near $80,000.
We did not, Chief, and I
Okay.
stand corrected. It was actually zero. We spent nothing in fiscal year 18. The $80,000 is actually, it was off the line, and that is actually for forfeiture purchases, 0121658.
Yeah.
And then for Avalon Petroleum, that is $73,052.94, and that's for 0121655. So it's off the line.
Okay, all right.
Okay, let me go back to that. Year to date is 33.7 or 33.8, correct, Ms. Redmond, for the fuel? No.
33,795, correct.
Yeah, that's for the fuel thus far. And we're pretty much on track for that by April, end of April. Okay. It's good to get clarity on that. Any other items on here, Chief?
No, sir, unless you have questions about any items, I couldn't figure out anywhere else to cut from.
Yeah, without a doubt. Overtime, you and I think it was Trustee Pearson of the Police and Fire Committee, and some cost savings as far as overtime is concerned. Could you tell us where we at on that? And
sure, absolutely.
For the public, explain exactly how you came about coming up with those savings in overtime.
I would say the vast majority of the overtime comes from having to fill empty shifts. So if there's a certain number of officers that are specified for a certain shift and one calls off sick that day, or someone is on a vacation which they can't take, or personal time, then we have to fill those slots. And when we fill those slots by contract, they have to be filled with full-time employees. And full-time employees, when they work overtime, they're entitled to premium pay, the overtime rate. We also have overtime when we have major crises, such as, for example, a homicide. On a homicide, that's a situation where all hands are on deck. All the detectives are called in, and some of them may be on days off. They might possibly even be on vacation, but it's a time where we need the most people to help solve the crime within the least amount of time possible. So that can cause overtime. Officers that go to court, they have assigned court keys, but when they go to court, they are usually on their off time, and when they go to court by contract, they are paid overtime. So one of our cost saving, well, overtime saving measures is to make sure that the personnel, that we have additional personnel. And I want to thank the board for agreeing to allow us to hire 2 additional officers. And hiring 2 additional officers will help the overtime situation some. It's not going to completely eliminate the overtime, but it will help some. Another thing is when detectives have to interview a suspect or a witness to a crime, instead of them making appointments for after their shift or before their shift, we want them to make sure that they interview these people while they are working, so that we will not incur any overtime expenses. So there's a lot we're trying to do to make sure that we pay as little overtime as possible, but we will not be able to avoid all of it.
Now, one of them you did monitor that you divulged to myself and Trustee Pearson on. That one you just gave an illustration on the detectives.
Yes.
What did you do to reduce that? It's something to do with the scheduling, you were saying.
That had to do with the scheduling of whenever, if there's any situation where they think that it's going to be overtime, they must present it to the investigative commander, and then it has to be approved by the deputy chief or myself. So they're not allowed to just arbitrarily just work overtime because they want to, or they want to put additional work into a case. There has to be a purpose, and it has to be approved. And also, when I just spoke about them making appointments for when they are actually on duty.
Okay. For the avenues, I guess that would be a different committee meeting, which I'm glad Trustee Pearson, we can talk about some other cost-saving measures. One I want to ask about, because there's a rumor or question being raised. If we go back to item number 427, crossing guards, which comes under the police department budget. I see we're budgeted for 147.8, but there's no update on the year-to-date on that. Ms. Redmond, could we get that number? And I have a second question to follow up on that. The year-to-date for crossing guards.
I can't give you that. I'm not prepared to give you that number right now. We have a new payroll software, and so what they're doing is they're grouping crossing guards into 421 regulars. So I have to do a reclassification for that.
Okay. The other question: when school is out, are the crossing guards paid for the summer?
No.
No, they're not.
There are no benefits. How are they paid?
No,
Are they contracted or what?
they are only paid for the hours that they put in.
Okay.
So the hours before school, they're paid for, and the hours after school, they're paid for. In the summertime when there's no school, they're not paid.
Any other benefits connected
They're
with
seasonal,
that?
so there are no
Seasonal
benefits.
workers. No. So during the summer, they're off like a school teacher who did not get compensation for that summer.
Right. There is one additional piece of information that you probably already aware of, but I just want to make sure I say it again, that 2 of the crossing guards have been cross-trained as parking enforcement officers. So in between their shifts, they spend their time writing parking citations.
Right. And what we'll do at another meeting, we'll talk about the revenue help generated by that particular effort,
right,
and the other ones. We'll do that with Trustee Pearson's committee. So on overtime, you notice it was bumped up. Instead of $400K, it's now $675,205.
Yes.
And I think we all agreed for that increase, and that would also cover with the 2 extra officers. This is not including any part-time officers, because part-time officers, the overtime is not even an issue.
Right, that's correct.
Because they're doing less than 30 hours a week.
Right, and they don't get benefits, and they don't make overtime.
Okay. Well, one of the ideas, and I'll just throw it out there for the public, and so they can hear about it now, there was some discussion of having the crossing guards paid out of District 148 and 149 as opposed to our budget. Of course, that's a matter of us discussing that with both school districts, so that would give us a savings of $148,000. It's just in discussion right now. We're not talking about eliminating the crossing guards, just seeing if we can get another entity to pay for that. Anybody have any questions for the chief? I think you're just about done on all of that. New vehicles, there will be no purchase of a new vehicle. I see that it's $30,000 and about $5,300 was spent thus far purchasing a vehicle, or no? Or is there no line item for that? Maybe I'm misreading it. I don't see anything for purchase of new vehicles.
The last vehicles that we purchased were out of the asset forfeiture account,
funds. Okay.
which is not taxpayer dollars.
Gotcha.
Just as a side note, one piece of good news is beginning this Monday, we will begin permanent overweight truck enforcement with one officer.
And that would be a regular tour?
That will be a shift assigned to an officer who will, for his shift, he will enforce overweight trucking.
And I'm assuming the first shift, 7 to 3 or 5 to 1 or whatever.
This will be 6 a.m. to 2 a.m.
So
I'm sorry, 2 p.m., 6 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Semi-permanent for now. In other words, we're going to see how it goes. What's the upside and downside of the weight so that the public can understand what we're talking about?
So overweight truck enforcement, as you know, trucks have certain weight limits that they have to stay within to travel across the roads of Illinois. Occasionally, as probably them trying to save money, they will overload these trucks to make as least trips as possible. Due to the wear and tear and the cost of fuel. And occasionally we will catch them when they're over their weight limit, and they will be fined heavily for that violation. But one thing that you probably already aware of, but overweight trucks or even semis in general, they do a lot of damage to the roads. So when you see roads that are torn up, especially main thoroughfares, that are roads that are torn up, potholes, the pavement cracking away, a lot of it has to do with overweight trucks. So we want to make sure we have a truck enforcement officer, if not a whole unit, which I would love to get to, in place so that we can start finding them. And then it would depend on the board if these monies are used to fix roads and whatnot. So we want to put the burden back on the trucking companies.
So from my understanding, you stop a truck in violation of overweight, and there's an initial dollar amount fine, right? But once you go to court, that amount is negotiated. So, and it's usually lowered. And what portion goes to us and what portion goes to the county, and what's the turnaround time on that?
Sometimes depending on the violation, I've seen the initial fine or initial fee up to at least $10,000, if not sometimes above. But what does happen in court is a lot of the big trucking firms have attorneys working for them, and the attorneys will show up in court and try to negotiate with the prosecutors. And just for a plea of guilty or something like that, they will be willing to lower the fine. Now, typically in state tickets, which we call state tickets, which are adjudicated in county court, we would end up with usually about 33%. So the state would actually get a cut, and the county would actually get a cut. And also depending on if there's court fees. If there's court fees, then those will be paid out of that also.
Okay. Any other questions for the chief? If there are no more questions for the chief, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any department head next? How about water? Can we do that, Ms. Batten? We don't have anyone from fire, is that right, Ms. Redmond? That's correct. Okay.
Good afternoon. Bye.
Hi.
Well, the water department, we had already been trying to do whatever we can do to save money. So we cut back on office supplies and even, excuse me, I'm sorry. The operating expense, what we did this year that we didn't do last year, and we ordered the vehicle stickers and dog tags, we ordered according to how many residents that have vehicles in Dalton. This year we kind of ordered half, and then we order them as needed.
What is the number of vehicle stickers registered in the village?
I think it's like 16,000.
16,000.
Yeah.
And you say you order 8,000.
We ordered actually 10.
Okay.
And we've sold so far about a little over 9,000.
Okay. What's in place to go after the other 8,000?
What's in place, what?
What's in place to go after the other 8,000 vehicles that are registered in the village of Dalton that do not get their sticker? Because you're saying you allocate for approximately 8,000 to 10,000.
Right.
So that means that's another 8,000 to 6,000 that aren't getting their sticker. What do we have in place?
Well, we just had a training today with the TMA letting us know about different ways we can go by reaching out to the residents. And one of them, Chief Collins, was in the training today, as far as we can run reports and send those residents out letters, and then they can write tickets accordingly.
Okay, the letter is not a citation, it's a letter of warning. Is that how it works?
Yeah, pretty much, yes.
So what teeth are in that letter? So if I get this letter, and I've been a scofflaw for the last 8 years, 5 years, or whatever, what's in that letter to prompt me to come in and buy my, is it worded a certain way that's going to?
Yeah, we're just going to basically have the letter saying that we see that you have not purchased your vehicle sticker this year, and to avoid getting any further citations or late fees, please visit the Village Hall as soon as possible.
And this is the first year we've implemented that.
Yes.
So we won't know the effect of it until this time next
Exactly.
year. Yes, ma'am. I need to ask you, as far as savings, what is the total number of clerks you have over there, the total number of water meter readers, part-time and full-time? On clerks, what is the total number of clerks full-time?
Full-time clerks, we have, let me see, 3, 4, 5.
And part-time clerks?
3. I'm sorry, 2.
And meter readers, part-time and
full-time, we have 2 and 1 part-time.
I believe in closed session, we had given permission to hire 2 more part-time readers. What's the status of that?
We haven't moved forward with it yet, as of yet. I think they listed it on the website, but nothing has happened yet with it.
No bites?
No.
Okay. The 5 full-time clerks are all under AFSCME, are all union represented?
No.
Okay, so what constitutes a clerk being in the union?
I think they just asked if they want to be in the union, and then they have to kind of initiate it themselves.
So the 5 full-time clerks that you have, how many of those are union and non-union?
That I know of right now, just 1.
Okay, so 1 is union, and the other 4 full-time are non-union?
Yes.
And of course, part-time are not union at all.
Yes.
Meter readers, the 2 full-timers are AFSCME, correct?
Yes.
And they're full-time. And of course, not with the. So you have a total of 3 meter readers and 7 clerks.
Correct.
5 full-time and 2 part-time.
Correct.
Yeah, the mic's not.
And this question, I think, is more of Ms. Redmond. I just want to clarify, the water department comes in a different fund. It's not under general revenue, am I correct? Okay.
Yes, so everybody can understand, there's a separate fund, which is a water fund that comes in, and we got some cost-saving measures, and hopefully someone got in touch with Mr. Stacy. Were you able to talk to him from what? Okay, don't worry about it. We won't go over that today then. We'll deal with that with the Public Works. Okay, what else you got?
Pretty much that's it, I think.
Okay, on your, I got a question internal. Your software, which is
Locus.
What's your assessment of Locus? And
well,
I need you to be forthright on that, and because I know you can't go back to the old one. I already talked to IT. That's
right.
Dead. We can't go back to the what was it called?
Cameo.
I always think of the group when I hear that. There's no going back to Cameo, correct?
No.
Based on the old system and whatever.
Exactly.
The purchase decision on this system, what is your assessment of it? And you've been dealing with it now for the last, what, couple years?
Yeah, 3 years. Locus, to me, is not a billing system. I think they just kind of implemented the billing into that. And then, again, that's just my opinion.
You're being very reserved. I'm trying to find out from you, because we get a lot of complaints from the water department. This meeting is being webcast. Okay, it's on channel 499. And when the public hears about a software issue in the water department, and as you know, one of the biggest concerns is errant water billing and such, and I'm sure there's reasons for everyone.
Yes.
But I'm also hearing that Locus, there are certain persons can't talk to Locus from certain departments. They're not able to interact with one another. give me your overall assessment of this locus. If you feel it's a thumbs up, thumbs down, do we need to do it a different route or what? Because is it a software issue or is it a personnel issue that we have in these issues in the water department?
Well, most of the issues that we were having was with the estimated bills, and that was due to us either not getting into the homes or not getting the readings, period. And then also, just so you guys know, Locust, if you have a usage in your home between 1 and 10 units and we put your reading in, you're still going to get an estimated bill, because Locust software is not set to say, hey, he used 4 units and this was an actual bill. It will automatically give you an estimated bill.
So, for example, there's a resident I'm dealing with right now. He's been living out here 25 years. His meter's on the outside.
Okay.
Every one of his bills has the letter A with the parenthesis on it. He assumed that his bills were all actual readings because the meter's on the outside.
Okay.
He just received a bill for approximately $500. Actually,
Okay.
he's been over here over 20 years. His bill floated from 140 to 160 something. So apparently this might kind of refresh, because this was recent, that you might even be aware of.
Well, I have to actually look at the bill, but it's possible that a billing cycle or 2 prior to that might have been estimated. And another thing I'm finding out from my meter readers that are coming in, they're telling me that, yeah, some of the people have outside readers, but people don't realize when they put their brooms and their mops on the inside of the thing, they're knocking the wires loose. So we have a lot of times, my meter readers are telling me, Barb, I had to fix these people wires and put it back together, because that's why we weren't getting a reading on the outside.
Okay. I don't want to bog us down with that. I just, because your department is one of the departments that's actually in the black.
Right.
Of the water.
And then the other problem too they're having with the outside is sometimes they're not compatible with the meter that's inside due to it being too old, usually.
Okay.
The newer meters are compatible with the outside
Okay, quickly,
readers.
too, because some people had the same issue. I got a meter on the outside and one on the inside. They were told that somebody's coming from Public Works to look at, I believe, both meters.
Yes.
The one on the inside and the one on the outside, to find out what the issue is, because these are retired couples.
Right.
They've been in that house. They had a son living there a year or so ago.
Okay.
And it shouldn't jump up after he's left to that amount of money.
Okay.
What happens with that after you find out it's a bad meter? Is it the inside meter or the outside meter, or both?
Sometimes it can be both.
Do you change it? What happens when you find out they're bad meters?
What we do is we send our information over to Public Works to have them go and check the meter to make sure it's working properly, it's not faulty, it's not leaking, because sometimes the meter leaks too. So when we do this, the people, they send us a report. Public Works sends me a report, and then I attach it to the people in the notes in the person's account. We call the customer back, let them know if the meter was okay or not okay. If the meter's stopped or it's defaulted or it's not working properly, then we replace the meter at the village expense. If it's not and it's working perfectly fine, then we can kind of evaluate some other things. We ask people, hey, is your toilet, you think your toilet may be leaking? Some people don't think if their toilet is running and you have to jingle it that it's not leaking. They think it's not leaking, and it is. So, and sometimes people have extra people in the household that would cause your water bill to go up, that has moved in, kids to move back home, grandkids to moved in, so there's a lot of different reasons. Everybody's scenario is different, so.
Okay. I just wanted that for the clearance of those residents that are out there, because and when I get calls, I say the same exact thing that you say, but this particular one, and I know, I hope he's watching this, because I told him I would follow up with him. He wants to know if it's his meter from the outside or inside, because his concern was that $500 bill. I said, well, pay whatever your bills you've paid in the past. Don't, and this is to the residents, you should at least pay whatever your last bill was. In other words, don't say I'm not going to pay the whole thing. At least pay. Did I advise him correctly? Like, his last bill was $160. I said, well, at least pay that, so whenever you get it worked out,
Right.
be
Well, we
close to
told
it.
people to come in and or we call them and we make a payment arrangement, and we have to note the account, because otherwise, if they don't pay their full bill, now they're going to be on a shut-off list, and we don't know what they're doing. So if they just paying something and we don't know what they're doing, they have to call us and
Yeah.
discuss this with us.
Yeah, he did that.
Okay.
And after he talked to either you or someone else, and they say you were very polite, by the way. They did mention your name, which
Thank
is
you.
good. And he asked me, I don't think you all discussed that part yet because he hadn't come in yet. It was an initial discussion. And he
Okay.
asked me, should I pay? I said, don't pay the whole thing. Just pay what you normally pay, and then they'll work that out with you, which
Right, and
that's
we
what you
did.
said.
I think I know who you're talking about, and we put them on a payment arrangements for the difference, and I can spread it out. Sometimes depends on the amount of the bill. We can spread it out to a year. But the residents also got to know they have to continue paying their current bills as they're going. Yeah.
Okay. Trustees, y'all have any questions for water? Okay. Thank you, Barbara.
All righty. Thank you.
Next, with Department Head, Mr. Stacy, please. Let's do Public Works.
Good evening, everyone. I went over my budget with Ms. Redmond, and we found 4 things that we can reduce in. The first one was with our sidewalks. We were
What number so we can follow?
521. On the it's 520. We were budgeted at 20,000, and
You're saying 520, unless they're out of order. I see a 513 and jumps to 521. I see 521 as sidewalks. Is that the same one?
probably mine says 520.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, same one. We were 60,000 over budgeted. So what we did was we took it from 35 to 45,000. We were over budgeted. We started replacing a lot of sidewalks this year that the residents were calling and complaining about as trip hazards and all that. Some of them we put the wheelchair ADA compliant on some of the areas that needed them. So we moved that one.
Okay, since you started with this one, and I'm glad you did, we were budgeted for 35K for the upcoming 19. Ms. Redmond, if you look at the previous 2 years, and we're still talking that line item 521, the 2 previous actuals, what did we spend on sidewalks?
In 17, we actually did not budget for sidewalks, but the actual was $9,850. Fiscal year 18, the budget was $20,000 even. The actual was $83,725.
Okay, so that's bumped up from the 72,000. I'm looking at $72,125.
$72,125 is what we have actually spent so far this year, this current fiscal year.
Okay, but you just mentioned another number previous to 72. What was that number?
$83,725. Is that what you were referencing?
Right. What is 83,725?
That's the actual for fiscal year 18.
Okay, because I'm not seeing that on that line item. I see 35K, and then I see the proposed for 45K, and what's been spent already is 72.
Correct.
No, this is the one that the public has, which I was very clear. I want to make sure the public can see everything that we're saying. That's not on the other budget?
I'm sorry?
That's not on the one that was passed out.
Correct. So what you have that was passed out today is strictly fiscal year 19. Previous reports that were passed out show fiscal years, I believe, 16, 17, 18, and 19. But because we have so many amendments for fiscal year 19, that's all that was presented tonight.
Okay. Okay, and also there is a discrepancy on this particular thing because, as you know, and I'll say it publicly, do you know, Ms. Redmond, that we do have it that any bill that's 5,000 or more must be approved by the board?
That is correct.
Now, this bill that we just currently received for 5-Star that did part of this, and I'm assuming this is part of the 72K, was that approved by the board?
It was
With
not.
5-Star?
The 5,000 is per invoice, which I believe what you're referencing is a payment to 5-Star that has not gone out yet. It was not approved by the board. It was over $50,000. That was not one invoice. That was a combination of invoices.
But when 5-Star receives payment, they will be receiving over $50,000, though, correct?
That is correct. But invoices presented to the board have to be $5,000 or more per invoice.
Okay. And some of those were over 5.
There was one for 17, I believe 17,300.
And was that presented to the board?
I
Or
don't think
approval?
so.
No, was not. Okay. All right. And the reason why I mention that because a couple of years ago we have submitted a ordinance for transparency, and one of the parts of transparency is that we need to see what items are being spent that's $5,000 or more. That's why when you see certain votes that are taken on a warrant list, which we'll deal with at another time, any expenditure that's $5,000 or more must come through the board. At one time, we were very disciplined on it, and it was being done, but it seems lately, and I did give you a call some months ago and say, hey, we're not seeing any that are $5,000 or more, and I think your response is just hasn't been any.
We haven't had it, correct.
Okay. Okay, yes, sir.
Okay, so Ms. Redmond, on this one, we have 2 different budget proposals. One of them has sidewalks with nothing in the budget. Another has sidewalks with a $35,000 proposed budget. But it looks like we're currently at 72, so we're already over.
Correct. So initially, we had budgeted $35,000. That was included in the budget that was given to Clerk Dugan back in July. With the amendments that the trustees had presented, the sidewalks budget was eliminated.
Yes.
It was down to 0.
And that was in August 10th, I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct.
The budget passed, and the repair on the sidewalks, that $50,000 expenditure was what date?
That was this last meeting, so I believe
So
September.
it's after August 10th, after the passed budget.
Correct.
Okay.
And that expenditure has brought us up to the $72,125.
Over budget.
Correct.
Okay.
Cut it out.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes. Continue? Okay. The next one will be line 550. That's going to be tree maintenance. It was budgeted for $50,000 and we spent $7,750. So we took that one and moved it down to $25,000.
How much?
You're saying it's this year the actual says 41.9, right, Mr. Redmond?
Correct.
Okay, and
Is
what's
that
the
mine?
amount that you have, Mr. Stacy?
Mine on the copy, I guess, says $75.50 or $77.50.
That's fiscal year 18 actual. $7,750 is fiscal year actual for 18. Fiscal year 19 actual is $4,190.
She don't have that on this budget. Go ahead.
I was trying to see how much was spent last year.
That's the $77.50.
$77.50. And you cutting it in half to 50, right,
Cut
Matt?
it to 10.
10.
Yeah, it took it down to 25,000.
Why so low?
Well, you only spent $77.50 the year prior.
Well, I understand that, but you already know my issue. Everybody do trees, trees, trees. So I prefer it to stay where it's at. I understand we're doing cuts, but a lot of residents complain about getting their tree trimmed or tree cut down. So I think that budget amount should stay where it's at so we can increase that. It's just my suggestion.
Okay, that's a good point. And out of that $77.50 that was spent last year, what portion of that was actual cuts and what portion of that was actual trims and what portion of that was alleys? Because I'm sure you're referring to alleys also. You get complaints on alleys, overgrowth of alleys. Of that $77.50 last year, do you know the breakdown on those 3, cuts, trims, and alleys?
I don't have the breakdown on that, but majority of it would be cut downs. We do our own trimming in Public Works. Anything dealing in the alleys would be vacant homes that residents call on. Other than that, code enforcement goes out and gives the homeowner a warning citation. to clean up behind their alley.
Okay, so this line item budgeted for tree maintenance, getting back to Trustee Henyard's concern, is this us, Podarski, is this outsourced, or is this strictly Public Works that's doing this cutting on tree maintenance, or is that a combination?
The tree maintenance would probably have been just Pekarski, the outside contractor that we use.
And you're saying that the majority of this, you say you don't have the breakdown, but let's just deal with 18. The $77.50 that was spent last year, correct?
Yes.
That was, the majority of the money came from what? Public Works budget or outsourcing?
That would have been outsourced.
So you're saying we outsource because we can't cut and trim like Podarski does?
Yeah, some of them, the bigger ones that are over the houses and all that, we're not set up. We don't have a truck big enough, and I'm not going to put my guys in danger or danger to any of the residents' homes. They're set up to rope the limbs. They're set up with everything.
Well, can we increase that line? I know that don't sound right because I know we're doing budget cuts.
That ball's in your part. Or
well,
you
my vote is to increase that line. I know you dropped it to 10. I know we do need it. I get a ton of complaints about it, which you know. I hit your email up, your phone up. So we need to increase tree cuts.
But if we're increasing a number, and I'm glad you, what number are we talking about increasing? What kind of comprehensive plan does Public Works have in place to say if you're going to increase it 3,000, 5,000, what does that mean? If we were to increase it by whatever dollar amount, how much work is done outside of the $77.50? Because it's easy to say let's increase it to 20,000 or 30,000 or whatever. But what comprehensive plan do we have in place to go after these dead trees, diseased trees and alleys and so forth?
Well, any of the trees that are dead or whatnot that we can handle, we take care of ourselves in-house. Like I said, if it's bigger and over homes and that's contracted out. Then that would go to, I would call Pekarski, they come out, give us a price, and go from there.
Pekarski primarily deals with cutting the tree down, is that right?
Yes.
Oh, not trimming. We would do all trimming.
They do trimming too at times.
Yes, I'm trusting.
Okay. Hey, Matt, if I can ask the question, I think is the $10,000, would that be, in your opinion, is that sufficient enough to service the community?
To add 10,000 more?
The current, what it currently is 10,000. Is that sufficient, or would you recommend a different total?
There's trees that need to be cut throughout the town. So
you would recommend more?
Yeah, I would.
Again, if we're going to recommend more, there should be some kind of plan to say, okay, we have X number of trees to be cut. We can't just say we're going to add money to cut trees. It sounds good. It's very palatable to your ear. I would need to know as a resident where my money is going to. If we're going to add more to tree cutting, you only spent $77.50 in 2018. Ms. Redmond, what was it in 2017 on tree cutting on line item 550? Because I'm not hearing a comprehensive plan, even if we were to add money. And I appreciate Trustee Henyard wanting to add money, but I would like to know, hey, by us adding this amount of money, we can cut this number of trees, we can hit this number of alleys. What did we spend in 2017?
We did not. It wasn't until fiscal year 18 that we actually separated tree trimming and gave it its own line item. Before, it was put into 0141549, I believe.
Okay, and what was it in that year?
549 has, it's not just strictly tree trimming. It has a couple of things in there. That's what we use for contractual services. Now, if you like, I can run a report that shows what we paid Pekarski.
Well, okay, I'm looking at it for 19 is projected at 65, right? And so other professional service includes tree cutting and what else? Because it sounds like he's saying it's 65,000 for tree cutting under other professional service, which is line 549. 65,000, which was now dropped to half of that almost. So is that including what Public Works is doing with trees? So we're really spending like 65,000 plus another 25,000 or 10,000 just to do trees. Am I reading that right? Or what other professional services are we talking about in that 65,000 line item?
So in 549, that includes what we pay for IT services, which is $11,200 a month. We have that money is split between 8 departments, and so I believe each department is responsible for $16,800 for IT services each year.
So the total amount for IT is $16,800, and it's split between Public Works and who else?
It is split between general administration, public works, housing, I believe permits, water, Melanie Fitness, police, and fire, I believe. It should be 8 total.
Did you have one?
Yeah, I do. I'm not saying to add to it. I'm saying he cut his budget too much. If he was at 50,000, he done dropped it to 10,000. We cut way more trees than that. And I know the residents need that. I get a ton of complaints about that. I don't know about any other trustee, but I was known as the tree trustee lady. I get calls left or right about cutting down a tree or trimming it, either or. So all I'm saying is that he needs to increase it more. He cut it too much. That's what I'm saying. I'm not
Trustee,
saying
I must.
Yeah, go ahead.
On that one, for the tree trimming, it was reduced from 50,000 to 10,000. That was not something that Madam myself did. That was actually a recommendation of Mr. Kemp. That's his amended budget.
Oh, then you know it's a definitely no for me.
So that's not
no. Definitely no. I don't listen to Mr. Kemp, but you do know that. You run our day-to-day operations. I wish the board would respect that. They should ask you your opinion, and when you give your opinion, it should be noted, and we should all come to one agreement with that. My suggestion is not to cut that by to $10,000. I think it should be half, $25,000 for tree trimming.
I have 25. So if you look in column O, 221,
I see it.
I cut it from 50 to 25.
Well, I agree with that.
Okay, let me get back to that dollar amount of $65K, which has been reduced. It actually was not reduced. It kept in there with our recommendation. The $65K, we know a portion of that is IT. Of the $65,000, what portion is IT and what portion is for public works to cut trees and so forth with Podarski? Out of that $65K, that's
No, it's 2 different lines.
It's two different line items.
Yeah, but $65K, you said is other professional service, which include IT, correct?
Correct.
How much of that $65,000? We know $16,800 is the total for IT. Of the $65,000 for other professional services out of public works, of that $65,000, how much is IT of that $16,800?
I don't think I'm following you, trustee.
Okay, you said the total budget for IT is $16,800.
Correct.
And you said that $16,800 is split between maybe 5 different departments.
No, the 16.8 is what each department is responsible on an annual basis. So we pay IT, it's $11,200 a month. That is split amongst 8 departments.
Okay, so that answers the question. $11,000 is part of that $65,000 of other professional services for
Correct.
public works.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So that leaves $54,000 for public works, other professional services, if you take out IT, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so out of that $54,000, how much of that is used for cutting trees with Podarski and yourself? Or is there something else outside of that?
We don't use Podarski. Podarski is no longer charged to 0141549. It was in fiscal year 18 that we separated into its own line, its own line item, which is 0141550. Tree maintenance.
Okay, so now that leaves $54,000. What is being spent in that particular line on 549 other professional services?
Give me one moment and I can tell you.
The reason why I'm asking that, because if that's part of the tree, there's no need to touch it. I just don't know how much of that is tree service.
So who made this budget? Did Mr. Kemp make the budget, or did she make the budget?
She had the budget. Let me clear that while you're looking that up. By state statute, the mayor and staff is supposed to come up with a budget by statute.
I only asked because she said that he.
Let me get clarity to your question. That way we can all understand. By state statute, it is the mayor and staff that's to come up with the budget. Staff would be Ms. Redmond. Ms. Redmond came up with a budget. We had some differences that was forwarded to the mayor, I believe, on July 17th, and everybody should have gotten a copy of that the mayor can come back with his proposed budget. We never got a response from that. I think the mayor responded by saying if he was to make any suggestion that it would be shot down. He also said the term it would behoove you, which he looked at as a threatening term. The word behoove was not mentioned anywhere in my request for a budget. And if we all look up behoove, there's nothing threatening that at all. So when you say who came up with the budget, staff came up with the budget, but finance also had a counter to some of the line items, which is part of the reason that we're here. And while she's looking that up, just so you know, this budget, as Trustee House said, if we're going to borrow $1.3 million, which is a bond, to pay the bills. I'm against that. We can't continue to bond ourselves out of trouble. $1,300,000 to pay the bills, which is a bond. We will have Mr. Kinkar here on September 17th to explain exactly how that works. We're also borrowing $600,000. We're also borrowing $600,000 from the sale of the Melanie Fitness Center to make this budget. That's $1.9 million.
You know you jumped.
Oh,
We still on?
yes, ma'am. But I'm you had a concern about the,
No, you
and then she's
left
looking it
me.
up. So you want to answer it? So I don't want to belabor that. Go ahead, ma'am.
So included in 0141549 other professional services are payments to service sanitation as well as CCP, Calumet City Plumbing.
Okay. No tree service in that whatsoever. Only
No,
tree
that's on
maintenance is on
550.
550, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Stacy.
Okay, moving on to the next one would be 619, and that would be street sign maintenance. We moved that from, well, fiscal year 18, we spent $1,353.
I'm sorry, I lost you. Give me that number again, Mr. Stacy.
Line item 619, that's street sign maintenance. We were budgeted for $10,000. We spent $1,353. We took that one from $10,000 and we moved it down to $3,000.
What is street sign maintenance?
Street sign maintenance is any street signs we call, get supplies on. They make any signs that we can't make because we have a machine that is, it's an aged machine to make street signs. We also purchase stop signs from them because they come in bundles, they're already made. Snow route signs, the street sign brackets, anything like that.
Yes, sir. When you say street signs, for example, like Minerva, Cottage Grove, those street signs, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Does that include the handicap signs as well?
Yes, we get handicap signs from them too.
Okay, so again, me with budgeting, I know that we asked for the handicap signs to be 2 signs going forward. So is that included in that budget? I think it's too low again. I want you to include that so that residents now can get 2 signs for parking.
Right. I'll check on that tomorrow, see how much the signs are, and I'll get back to you with a price on seeing how big of a bundle I can get from them.
Well, we had it budgeted for $10,000, and Ms. Redmond, you dropped it to $3,000. They've spent only $435.50 year to date.
Correct.
So, what was it fiscal year, the 2 previous fiscal years spent for those?
Fiscal year 17, the budget was $3K. Actual was $3,868.87. Fiscal year 18 budget was $10K. We actually spent $1,353.80.
Okay, so we're not spending that much on signs, but as Trustee Henry said, with the addition of the second sign, that's going to bump it up. But we never, we only went over $3,000 in 2017 of $3,800 and some change, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Then the final one will be line 652, operating supplies. It was budgeted fiscal year 18 at $25,000, and we spent $4,940. Yvonne, is that right?
That's correct.
And then,
Pardon me, what is operating supplies?
that would be, Yvonne, mine cut off. Do you have that by
Yes,
chance?
I'm pulling it up.
And would that include salt?
No.
So that's not office supplies.
He's saying operating 652, operating supplies. Because so far you've only spent $142.45 budgeted, proposed budget for $5,000.
So included in that are payments to Kurtz Hardware, Intercom, what is it? Intercom Laboratories, and Granger for supplies.
Okay, could you identify for the public who those 2 suppliers are and what does that entail?
Kurtz Ace Hardware is right down the road. It's the hardware store. We purchase any small things that we need, nuts, bolts, and all that for the shop use. Granger is another supply company. Again, we've had some major issues with our heating and air conditioning throughout our whole building, plus some issues with some of the other stuff, and Scott goes there, picks up the supplies for the furnaces, the air conditioning units and all that. And the lab core, that should be going into the water fund. That's for water sampling.
Is that correct, Ms. Redmond? Should we separate that then?
I will look into it tomorrow.
Okay. I want to go back to Granger. You said HVAC and stuff. HVAC, you referring to the entities, the village? Which buildings are you talking about for HVAC with Granger?
Public Works.
The Public Works?
Yes.
Not the village properties, just Public Works?
Yes.
So any Granger bill that we see, it deals with the HVAC of that location?
Well, the supplies, electrical motors, switches, thermostats, whatever goes wrong inside the furnace. And the air conditioning units, Scott could probably give you a better breakdown on the official names of the parts and all that, but that's where he goes to get most of the stuff.
Okay. The next one, could you explain fuel? We know that stayed pretty much at 75 for the residents, and I'd like to know what we've been spending on fuel, because I asked a question which I'll ask today since the department head is here. We're at 75,000 pretty much straight across your recommendation and Finance Committee's recommendation. We're still at 75. What is the monitoring on that gasoline? What is the monitoring system that's in place?
The monitoring system
we had it installed about maybe 2 years ago. How do we monitor the gas
Stan
usage?
had that installed 2 years ago or so, and him and I believe IT are the only ones with the access. To my knowledge, I have no access to that.
So how do you receive reports on that gas usage?
I don't.
I'm sorry, Ms. Redmond.
It was my understanding that all department heads had a training, or I believe a training was scheduled, so each department head can go get the proper training to run the reports and check the usage for each of their vehicles.
So you don't run reports?
Nope.
Have you ever ran a report?
Nope.
So you have no idea how much gas is used in the pumps that's located at Public Works?
No, sir.
You mentioned IT, which would be Mr. Blocker.
Yes, Mr. Block, I believe he does it because I just had some issues with my employees just recently with their numbers entering them in, and Derek had came out with the company and fixed whatever was wrong with it.
So your understanding, Ms. Redmond, all department heads should have been trained on that, department heads such as police, fire,
correct,
Public Works, those are and I believe housing, because they use the pumps also. At your understanding, all of them had training on it?
I know training was set up initially. I don't know if they did not have the training. I'm not sure. I was not there.
Okay, well, I think that's an issue because we had an issue with pilferage on that gas usage, and I asked last board meeting what's being monitored, and I was told by Ms. Redmond, I'll say it again publicly, that she said she would have to check with the department heads. And of course, I also referred that to the mayor, but it sounds like, at least with Public Works, who would probably use, well, I would believe the police department would probably use more gas than anyone. Mm-hmm. So, and it's, Chief, if you don't mind answering, have you all been trained on, you can't, if you would please? No.
To my knowledge, there has not been any training conducted specifically related to department heads getting information. When the system was put in, obviously, Mr. Urban was in there, and I thought he would get all the information and distribute it. So when he left, I don't know who the ball was passed off to, but I've never run any reports because I don't have access to it.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I think that's a serious issue that we're spending $75,000 a year, and that's just Public Works. I don't know what it is for police and fire, and us not having any reports being ran to counter. In other words, there's no.
Is that correct, Yvonne? I got budgeted 75, but it shows here that I only spent 51.
Correct. But actually it was 51.
And that was for 20. What year is that?
2018.
And the previous year, fiscal year 17 was 57,945.03, and it was 75K budget as well.
And thus far they spent 21,000.
Correct.
Am I reading that correctly? Okay. Yeah.
It sounds like on this one that there was a transition when our village administrator left, and there were some assumptions that happened, but nothing ever followed through. I think these are the kind of things that, when we were talking about the transition plan, that I wanted to kind of highlight, that we wanted to make sure we had a firm plan before implementing things, because as we see, we can kind of briefly move on something and then and things kind of fall apart.
And I respect and appreciate that, but that transition plan, I think Mr. Urban left here 2017 of July, and that's been over a year. That something should have been in place. So
I'm just making sure we don't have that problem today moving forward.
Okay, Mr. Stacy.
Thank you. That is all with the changes I made.
Well, let's go to purchasing of new equipment, because there was nothing budgeted for that. Line item 840, but yet almost $22,000 was spent. There was nothing budgeted, nothing recommended on that line too. Am I right, Ms. Redmond?
That is correct.
So what
And that's
is $22,000 expenditure?
That is for the new fire vehicle, the fire engine.
And we put that under?
No, I'm sorry, not the fire
Public
engine,
Works?
the street sweeper. I apologize.
Oh, yeah, the street sweeper.
Okay, explain that, because that's repairs for the street sweeper, correct?
No, that was a purchase of a street sweeper.
Okay, we only paid $22,000 for, this is a refurbished street sweeper, right?
No, it's a brand new, bought on a lease purchase.
All right, let me make sure I understand. We're leasing the street sweeper, because the number we were given last year, that we spent approximately $45,000 to maintain the street sweeper, and the cost of a refurbished one that we were quoted from you was approximately $45,000. So is this $22,000 a down payment? Do we own it, lease it? How does that work? Because it's $22,000 expense.
The $21,000 is a down payment. The leasing company gave us $22,000 for our old equipment.
And we're leasing it, so we're leasing with option to buy, or what? How does that work?
It's a lease purchase. As soon as we make the last payment, and I believe it's 5
years.
About 5 years.
What is
As soon as we make that last payment, the street sweeper is ours.
All right, so we have a 5-year payment plan?
Correct.
How much is the total price? Because this is the first I'm hearing that. Did you all know we bought a new street sweeper? Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, what was the total amount of the street sweeper, Ms. Redmond?
220, 221, 221,000.
21K? Okay, thank you. That's fine, $200,000. Now, I want to go back to your department for premium, salaries premium. We would go back to line item 423, which is premium, which is just a fancy word for overtime, right?
Correct.
And we're budgeted for $50,000 all the way across, and we agreed with that. But you're doing pretty good. Is the majority of your overtime tend to come in the wintertime because of snow and weather?
Yes, majority of the overtime is throughout the winter months, starting probably October, November. Water main breaks, snow plowing usually goes through March.
Okay. I have to ask you a personnel issue also. What is your total number of man staff?
17 full-time. 17 workers in the field, 2 full-time administrative assistants in the office.
Would that, I don't want to demean it, it's like clerks, like the persons
Yes.
inside to take the,
Yes.
so 2 full-time, which don't hit the streets at all?
No,
So
they're in
the
the
ones hit the
office.
street, what is your minimum requirement per union?
19. We are below by 2.
By 2, yes, sir. Anyone retiring soon? No attrition happening anytime soon?
No, not 2 year and a half, 2 years at tops.
How many?
2, I know definitely. It depends on the other 2.
So possibly 2 to 4
2 to 4.
in 2 years?
Yes.
Full retirement, when we say
Yes.
okay.
Yes, full retirement.
Thank you. Anybody got any questions for Public Works? Okay, thank you, sir. Unless
you.
there's something else you want to add.
No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, who else we got? I guess I got to call them out. Media. There's got to be somebody else here.
Fire.
Fire's not coming.
Oh.
Yeah. He's the union.
How's everybody doing today?
Trying to find media.
The only cut that that was recommended by Yvonne Rittman was to take my purchase of new equipment cut budget from $3,000 to $1,500. My budget is extremely small, so that's the main cut that was suggested to me by Ms. Rittman. It's the only cut that I got on my budget. Any questions?
What would be the new equipment that would have been purchased for the $3,000 that's put back down to $1,500, half? That was really half. What were those new items or item?
I would update my laptop that I live stream from. I need another lens for a camera, and I pretty much sucked up that $3,000 right there. $1,500, it'd just be the laptop.
Well, there was also a reduction in other professional services.
There was?
Ms. Redmond, in that proposed budget. Oh, she went to, we're talking about Media Center line number 549. And explain so the public can know what are the other professional services in media, because it was really actually a proposed for $50,000.
Well, whose budget are you talking about? Kim's budget or Yvonne's budget?
One in front of you, 6,000.
I'm looking at both of them.
6,000.
So 6,000 other professional services is what I use if I'm not able to record something, if I'm out of town, if I'm not able to cover something, I get somebody else to cover it for me. And that's what I spent other professional services on.
The change in there, the 50,000 is the recommendation to move from an employee to contractual. So the other professional services, that 50,000 represents the new contractual person that an RFP will be put out for.
And whose recommendation is that, Yvonne or Mr. Kemp?
Mr. Kemp.
So we're looking at Yvonne's budget and Mr. Kemp's budget.
Correct. Well, you can call it Mr. Kemp's budget, but let me use the right language. It's not Mr. Kemp's budget. For those who are not aware, Mr. Kemp, Marlo Kemp, who is volunteering his services, helped us to look over this budget. But we not only had the help of Mr. Kemp in ascertaining some of this information, we used some other services as well. And the 50,000 is the total budget for the proposed budget, if that's what you're saying. My question was other professional services that are at $6,000, but it was actually, which is the proposed budget for Ms. Redmond was $6,000. What I'm asking out of that, which you answered, is to hire videographers. What about the internet, the website? Is any type of website service used inside that?
There's a hosting service for that hosting fee, and a hosting fee for the mobile app.
Okay, anybody else?
But I'm asking, is there's definitely a difference between these two proposals on
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, I'm so glad you're back, Ms. Redmond.
Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Please give me clarity. Who budget, and when I say who, do I have in my hand that's on the table for the public? Is this your budget? And what I mean is, we hired you, mean the village, or is this Mr. Kemp budget that was given to Muhammad? So it's mixed in?
Yes.
Okay.
So the first column, you will show, what you will see is my original budget that was presented back in July.
That's to the left.
Yes.
All the way
Speaking to the mic, please.
To the left where it says, so everybody could follow, it says year 19 proposed budget. That's all the way to the left.
Yes, that is my original budget. The next column is the budget that was presented by Mr. Kemp.
And you'll see MK, it'll say proposal to MK.
Original, yes. Mr. Kemp and I had a conversation, and he made some recommendations. That is the next column, which says proposal to MK amended.
Yes, that's correct.
The last column is my final recommendation, which mirrors my original recommendation for the media department.
That's correct. Does that answer it?
Yeah, okay. I wish someone would clear that up in the beginning of all this, because everyone knows I'm no fan of the people that they had prepared the budget. I listen to the people that works for us first, before I go outsource. If that's the case, I would have called ex-trustee Robert Hunt and got numbers if I thought your numbers wasn't intact. As we went through this, everybody that presented today, it was your numbers or was it his numbers? Meaning each department head that stood up here today, who numbers was that?
I can tell you everybody went off of my numbers.
Okay.
Which will be in column O. That says proposal to YR.
All right, thank you.
I got a question.
Okay, and to bring clarity to let me follow up with you, Ms. Henyard, on that. I'm Trustee Henyard. If you look at some of the numbers were changed and they actually stayed the same. So there was agreement in certain columns. So you can't generally say this is Redmond's budget or Kemp's budget. It's the budget of the Village of Dalton with meeting of different minds. We not only met with Mr. Kemp, as I mentioned, there was some other accounting heads that we had meet on some of this information that we ascertained, which I'll go into at the very end. So when you see there's some confusion, this budget was also given to the trustees. You mailed this out, what, last week, I believe?
It went out, I do believe it was last week.
Right, so every trustee got this budget?
Correct.
The mayor's office get this budget?
The entire staff, all department heads and all the elected officials.
Okay.
Correct.
I got a question.
Can I say something before you say it? Trustee Muhammad, I asked you who budget this was in the beginning of our meeting, and you stated to me, and it's on record, that Ms. Redmond made it and the mayor. You never said Kemp name was in here as far as this was his budget. I asked that question for that reason.
Let me get some clarity to that one more time. By state statute, the mayor is to present a budget. And of course, that's with the help of staff, and staff is really Ms. Redmond. And in Ms. Redmond coming to the budget, and I'm using Ms. Redmond because the mayor had no input on this budget at all. And if you quote me what I told you, his wording was this: this is not my budget, this is their budget. Matter of fact, he quoted Attorney Murphy and said it's the trustees' budget. It's not the trustees' budget. He offered no input on this budget. He also said that if he was to offer any input, it would be shot down. That's why he had no input. And in the second part of that, he said, besides, he was being threatened by me using the word, what was the word I was charged with? It would behoove you, which was threatening. His words, that's what I stated. Okay, let me tell you something, ma'am. You're not going to have that in this meeting. There's going to be control in this meeting because you will be removed from this meeting. This is not your regular board meeting. I will, as chairperson of this committee, you will be removed for outbursts. So control yourself. Thank you. Go ahead. Did you have another?
I got a question. If the cuts are going to be made, why are we even reviewing Ms. Redmond's budget? Why am I even discussing this if the cuts are going to be made to other professional services?
Very good question.
Two, Mr. Kemp don't live in Dalton. Ms. Redmond lives in Dalton and is employed by Dalton. But you can say Mr. Kemp's budget, not Mr. Kemp in general, it's Mr. Kemp's budget versus Mrs. Redmond's budget, who lives in the village, who works for the village. So why even Mr. Stacy or myself even up here where next week they're voting to cut us?
Yes.
What's the point? Why are we asking question on things that's going to change next week?
Excellent question, because this has to be done publicly. It's not done behind closed doors, not done in the smoke-filled room. It's done at a committee meeting. The committee meeting's recommendation is given to the full board and the vote is taken. So that's why it's done publicly.
So Mr. Kemp's budget, everything was done publicly?
Mr. Kemp, in coordination, and Ms. Redmond is here. They've had extensive conversations. Mr. Kemp, myself, Ms. Redmond, Trustee House have been discussing this budget for months. Matter of fact, the goal of Ms. Redmond was to have this budget passed in April, in actuality, if I remember correctly.
That is correct.
But things happen, like running out of money, like having to borrow $1.3 million to pay the bills. I want to repeat that again. The old Chicago, $8.3 million of a water bill that you have to pay twice on, which we'll talk about at the end of this to explain why we have to do these cuts that you're referring to. And I don't want to use names. And the other cuts that we're doing. That's why we have the department heads to come up for further cuts. Not only that, we're asking the department heads to come up with things that would enhance our revenue, because you cannot bring this village to solvency just by cuts. You got to increase revenue, and we got to collect more. We're not collecting on that which we have. I want to answer your question with this.
Oh my God.
this is in continuing to answer your question. I have a report here that I read off, and everybody heard it. And it's from the Water Department, and you hear it every month, and you probably know the numbers by heart, Barbara. And we talk about the total water collections. We talk about the collections from the stickers, and we talk about the grand total. And then we talk about the monies that's outstanding. I think someone came up here and just talked about how we bill for about 8,000 to 10,000 stickers, but you have 16,000 registered vehicles. We don't have robust collections to get the money that's due to us. We have to become more robust. That's what the chief is trying to do, but I know his primary goal is public safety, just like with the fire department. We have our union representative back there, but they're trying to come up with creative ways that we can generate revenue, which is why he's doing something with the, I think, the overweight vehicles. So we not only have to do cuts, we have to do some enhancements in our revenue by doing more collections. So that's the reason that we're doing this as part of this.
So the question, the $1.3 million bond, you're against, Trustee Muhammad?
I'm against this. If you have an apartment that you're paying $3,000 a month for,
I understand that.
I'm going to answer your question, because we're not going to have politics in this. We're going to state the numbers as they are. That's why we ask persons to come up here and talk about numbers. That's why we have Ms. Redmond here, and that's why we have the Kasperich Group, which is the accounting firm that has been dealing with this village since 2013, who has an intimate knowledge of how this village is ran and not ran. Now, with the water department, we have an outstanding balance that runs regularly every month of approximately $2 million. I'll give you the exact number since I talked about numbers. And this is for the month of, I think, August. Is it correct? This report I just got, I received in September, that are 120 days or more past due. $1,993,557.05, which is an increase from the previous month of $329,352.10. That's money that's owed to the village. That's money that's owed to you. These are the individuals who are not paying their water bill. We have to get things in place to generate the revenue to bring in the collections to this department, which is water, which is a totally separate budget, but that's systemic of the collections that's due to this village when it comes to the corporate account. So that's some of the issues that we have without getting into the minutia too much, as Trustee Henry keeps reminding me not to do.
So you're okay with the $1.3 million bond?
You want to answer that because you said
no.
You didn't,
I'm asking you, Trustee Muhammad.
Oh, let me answer it one more time.
You didn't say yes or no. It's yes or no.
I'll answer it. You can ask me a question, but you can't dictate to me how I'm going to answer. I'll answer it quickly, but it won't be a yes or no.
You please answer.
I'm against the $1.3 million borrowing a bond to pay our bills.
So, Mr.
And let me finish answering your question, sir.
Bond, right?
For example, I used the analogy, if I'm in a $3,000 a month apartment and I can only afford $2,000, but every month I got to borrow $1,000 to stay in that apartment, I need to move to a $1,000 a month apartment where I can afford it. And that's where we at in this village. And we've been doing it for the last 5 years with bonds and inter-fund transfers, taking money from TIF districts to pay the bills. That's a no-no. So, we should not be doing that.
So Mr. Kemp recommended a $1.3 million bond, right, Jason?
No. That is no, he did not recommend a $1.3 million
Jason, could you please bring some clarity to us, please?
Mr. Kemp did not oh, you saying Mr. Kemp? Okay, go ahead. Now go on record and say that.
I think a lot of the confusion came. Our original proposal was a $900,000 bond to refinance a tax anticipated warrant that we did last year. That was the original budget that was passed and then amended. The amendments is where the confusion and the multiple versions of a budget came. After Mr. Kemp and Ms. Redmond had some discussions, Mr. Kemp recognized that we had a lot of contractual obligations, and the adjustments actually increased Ms. Redmond's initial deficit from $200,000 to $500,000.
Right.
Mr. Kemp's recommendation to satisfy that was an increase of a bond from $900,000 to $1.3 million.
So,
my suggestion is that we go with the original budget that was proposed, the $900,000 refinance bond, and begin the conversation there. In the event that we do want to go ahead and do a bond increase, which is not my suggestion, I think we should stick with the 900,000. But if we are going to increase it, let's increase it to a level that services are not interrupted. And we're talking about staff and the things that they do. But in addition to staff, we just went through a budget that we're cutting. We cut sidewalks totally out. We can't repair sidewalks anymore. Tree cutting is going down. We're going to be losing valuable services in addition to the people. My suggestion would be go back to the original budget proposal. Let's make it work. Let's monitor it, and let's continue to let's start the comprehensive plan from that point.
So you telling me, Trustee House, Mr. Kemp's recommendation is a $1.3 million bond?
Yes.
And he clearly said no. So which one is it?
Ms. Redmond, would you chime in, please?
Turn your mic on.
Mr. Kemp and I had a conversation. We went through every single line item in this budget. We went through ways that we can reduce some numbers, decrease some numbers. One thing, for example, we talked about the trash collections. So initially in my budget, I had proposed 1.7 million. We agreed on 1.6. So there was some more money that we were able to add to the budget, and so the deficit was no longer 218,000. Well, I'm sorry, after the amendments, it was 500,000. So that reduced it to, I believe, 400 or something thousand. The only way to bridge that gap in the deficit was to increase the bond from 900,000 to 1.3 million dollars. We both agreed upon that. There was no other way. We looked at every single line item for revenue. There was nothing else we could do. Nothing. That's one thing that Mr. Kemp and I agreed on. That's it.
So Trustee Muhammad, would you say that you gave out misinformation when Mr. Kemp said you said you were against the $1.3 million bond, and Kemp didn't say that, but they're saying that he did?
Well, let me, if you remember, Mr. Kemp was asked a question, I think, by Trustee House, and of his recommendation. He said, I can't tell you what to do or what not to do. His job was to come in and go over the numbers with you as he did. And again, we also met with the conspiracy group on a separate issue. And I don't agree. I'm talking about me personally. I don't agree that we as the village for the past 5 years have taken out a bond to make payment. We were told earlier this year that we were going to run out of money by November. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. We were told that we want to run out of money by November, which is a couple months from now. Then we were told, well, we got this bond, which was about $900,000, but we can extend it to the following year. Is that correct? As a matter of fact, it was added on from 900 to 1.3, but that also includes 600,000, because I want to add the 600,000, which is coming from the sale of the Dorchester to help meet our general obligations. And I'm saying I'm against that. I'm saying we're borrowing to pay. We're not cutting expenses. We're not increasing our revenues. We're bonding ourselves out of trouble, and we've been doing that for the last 5 years. That's the answer to your question.
Okay, so I mean, I guess the reason why I asked that, because you made it seem like your Kemp's budget, the one that you're going to vote on Monday, does not have a bond. It clearly has a bond.
We don't know if they're going to vote on that or not. That's what this meeting is about.
So
I'm voting no. I'm against it.
You're against Kemp's and Yvonne's budget.
I'm not against Kemp's budget. I'm not against Yvonne Redmond's. I want to remove the names of personalizing this budget. This is the budget of the Village of Dalton, with some recommendations by Ms. Redmond and some recommendations by Mr. Kemp and some internal recommendations. I don't think that we should bond ourselves continually like we've done for the last 5 years. Okay. I want to make that real clear about a bond. It's no different to me, and we got accountants here, we got some CPAs here, we got some chief financial officers here. I equate it to a payday loan, because we don't get the best interest rate because our credit rating is in the dump. Just like anybody here with bad credit, you can get a loan, but you're going to get a high interest rate. And that's where we're at right now. So I'm totally against that. So that's why I believe in making some cuts, also enhancing some revenues, being more robust on our collections to have an even balance. Now, sometimes a bond is necessary, but we had a bond that was taken out on this village. I asked this question last night. I'm glad you brought this up. We're paying on a bond right now that was a 20-year bond that we won't be through paying that bond for another 10 years. It was a 20-year bond to do with the Dorchester. Am I right? Yes. I asked questions, where's this bond? We can't get any answers. The best thing I was told, well, the bond, we're going to be done with that in 10 years. Now, we just sold the Dorchester. We're about to sell the door. It hasn't been sold yet, by the way. But we're still straddled with a bond that was taken out on that building that we're going to be paying for the next 10 years.
Okay.
One of many bonds that we're paying. So that's why I'm against the bonds.
So we can expect... Go ahead.
I believe Mr. Steve's question, and it goes to the amended budget that was passed and that the mayor vetoed, included a $1.3 million bond.
That's my point.
So his point being, we're saying that we're against it, but voting for it.
Yeah, and
clear that up.
And let's make, if that's your stance, then that means next board meeting, since the amendment, since you want to take the amended budget that the mayor vetoed, that's going to be voted on to overturn the veto, includes a bond. So when you overturn that veto, that means you're approving a bond.
We don't know what the status of the bond is because the board meeting hasn't taken place yet, and it have to be voted on. And yes, the mayor's veto will be overturned on September 13th.
So that means when it's overturned, a bond that you say you're against will be in place.
We don't know because the bond hadn't been voted on yet. This is a proposed budget. So the bond, Mr. Kinkar, who specializes in bonds, will come here Monday and explain to us how the bond system works. He was here before, and he's going to explain about this bond that we first had originally. I think Trustee House, you said it was $900,000, and it ballooned to 1.3, which is a bond that he will sell. Myself, Mr. Kemp, and Ms. Redmond was on the phone with Mr. Kinkar, and he said he'll try to sell this bond. And I said on the phone, you sound a little reluctant, Vince. What do you mean you may sell a bond? And his percentage of selling that bond was what percentage, Ms. Redmond?
That I do not remember.
It was 50%. There's a 50% chance that we may sell this bond. Let me take you back in time. Last year we defaulted on our bond that was due in December. Most of you remember that. And then we said, no, we didn't default. We defaulted on that bond, and that caused a great reputation for the Southland from the village of Dalton defaulting on the bond from last year. And they said, well, the insurance company picked it up. Yeah, the insurance company paid it because we didn't pay it, and we in turn have to pay the insurance company out. That's one of the reasons why I'm against the bond, because you're not showing where the revenue is coming in to pay for these bonds. And you can see, as we had to get one from MB Bank, I believe it was last year, with Mr. Urban, and it goes on. We'll be bogged down with this bond issue, but I'm going to let you leave the podium now, because to answer your question, the bond will be voted on September, I believe, 17th. To answer your question,
I just want to make that clear before I leave this podium, is that you're saying you're against the bond, but when you overturn the veto, you're for the bond.
No, I didn't say that. That's your word.
Which, when you overturn the veto, Kemp's budget includes a bond. Am I right, Ms. Redmond and Mr. House?
Yeah. Well,
that Mr. Kemp's budget includes a bond. Am I right?
The amended budget.
The village budget includes a bond.
The village budget includes a $1.3 million bond.
$1.3 million bond. So
okay, we're gonna hold on one second.
When you veto this, it's going to
hold on one second, Mr. Steve. Let's have some decorum in here, and we want to be respectful. And we have a disagreement. It's okay to have a disagreement, but let's be intelligent in our disagreement. And it's okay to have a disagreement, because we got a disagreement right now. I'm anti-bond. Yes, not Barry bonds. I'm anti-bond. Okay. I'm anti us continuing to go in debt and then to pay our debt out with bonds.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So when you overturn our veto, we got a bond. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we have any other department heads? If not, village clerk, which is not that much of an issue. Just want to make sure. Fire is not here. That's correct, right, Ms. Redmond?
Correct. And there was only one change with the fire.
Yeah, right. Finance. Did you want to do yours? I mean, yours is pretty cut and dry.
Mine is pretty simple. I had.
Let's give you a mic if you want to state it, because I know you have that other mic.
I'm good.
Okay, could you turn it on?
For finance, I had included a new hire for fiscal year 19. In my portion.
Give us your number so everybody could follow. That's why we had the
Sure. My overall budget.
No, give us the GL number so that the residents can follow along.
Yes,
with you.
it's 01 for general, 25 for finances department. So if we start with 0125,421, my original budget was 95,000. I reduced it to 54,365.38. That would be my salary alone. I had taken out the new hire that I was trying to get for this year. So
and we had budgeted for 95 for you, and
yes, for myself, 55,000 for myself and 40,000 for another full-time staff. I have taken that out. That is my contribution to my 10% of the reduction of my budget.
Now, Ms. Redmond, now that we're on that, where is your part-timer on here? What does she come under? That does the bank recs?
She will go under 01125549.
Oh, a different?
Correct.
What department is that? What
That's general admin.
Okay. And what is her total amount year? Is she benefits and?
No, not at all. She is $13 an hour.
I know. What's her annual? The annual?
She does maybe 20 hours a week or so, 16 hours a week.
I'll get it later from you. It's not a significant amount. Okay?
That was the only change that I made because that was a good portion of my budget. So my budget went from $132,793.52 to $74,753.60.
All right. Was that it, Ms. Redmond?
That's it.
Yours is pretty small, and the same with housing and licenses and permits. I just want to jump over to, so we can get clarity on this and everybody can take this budget home and study it, the proposed budget. And I just want to deal with the revenues right now, which is the very first page, that I believe that there has to be some increases in revenues. And again, a budget is a projection. You know, Ms. Redmond had a projection. We had a projection. Some we agreed, some we disagreed, some we haggled about, and that's what it was about. I think Trustee House used the best term. It was a very amicable meeting. There was no raising of voices, no disrespecting, we set up appointments. We called at your convenience. Am I correct? Because it was stated that you were being harassed. Maybe you were being harassed by someone else, but that's not me. You and I have been dealing with each other since I've been a trustee for 2015. I remember you from at least 2016. When did you come on board?
August 31st, 2015.
Okay, so it's always been amicable. I think the only complaint you may have against me that I'll say publicly, I may call you too early in the morning.
5:42 a.m.
I'm sorry. When you're retired, you get up super early. I may text you or email you or leave a voicemail, and that's me. I get up early, and I'm thinking about 6 o'clock. Everybody's up by 6, 7, 8. I know there's one trustee, I better not call her after 10. My point was, this was an amicable coming together. We had some agreements and we had some disagreements. There was nothing personal in this. My biggest concern with this entire budget is what we got back to, which is the bond. And it's been happening for the last 5 years with inter-fund transfers, and there are some in-house things that I'm not comfortable with. And I don't want to cast aspersions to any individual, but we have some village-wide problems. Payroll, water department, payment center, public works, all of them. We need to tighten them up. We're not getting the revenues in here that we should. It's a holistic approach that we have to take on this budget, because this is just numbers on the paper. When this is finally passed and becomes an ordinance, it becomes law, but it's up to the administration to adhere and have the fiscal responsibility to keep to these numbers. Am I right? I may not be using the right jargon because we got CPAs here, and I'm from Argyle Gardens, a public school, so I may not be using the right verbiage. But I know that once this becomes law, it's up to administration to adhere to these. That's why it's so important for transparency. It's so important for us. After this point, we will have monthly reports on the expenditures and the revenue that's coming in, so we know where we're at, so we're not blindsided on a warrant list where we're paying $50,000 for sidewalks. We don't have $50,000 to do sidewalks. We can't do sidewalks of a liquor store, and that it's been done as a 50-50 program, and a resident is told there is no 50-50 program. So these are the things that we have to do, and I won't go into the minutia of the detail again, but overall, we're going to come to an agreement, and come September 17th, we'll vote on this budget, and we're still amending from this point all the way up until we got another, 4 days before something can change. But the cuts that have happened are happening, and there will be other cuts. There will be other cuts such as non-personnel cuts. That means, and I talked to the chief about that, things such as overtime. We need to cut back on overtime. We have employees taking home $8,000 and $9,000 checks that work 6 days in a row because they couldn't get relief, and they did it legally. Am I right? Am I right? I mean, if he's within the law of the contract, that's what they deserve. But we have to look at the contracts, and we have a union representative here. I'll say it for him to see. We have to have a strong person to have a strong position for the village when we negotiate with the police department, when we negotiate with the public works department, and when we negotiate with the fire department. We have to relook at some of these contracts. There's no way in the world that somebody should be going home with an $8,000 or $9,000 check. And it's overtime, and it's legal, but it's a reason for that, and those are the things that we need to start taking a laser-like look at. Okay, I think that's all of the agenda, but I want to cap it off with some internal things without going into a lot of information. That there's some internal things that we have to start looking at. You know, our debt service, the Public Works Department, where we can allocate some things maybe to the water fund that will maybe lessen your budget. Some things with the MFT, our debt service. We have some payroll concerns. There are just some internal controls that we need to start looking at and fine-tuning them. And again, we won't get into any detail on that. And again, we won't say what particular department, but it's a village-wide issue that we have. And that being said, if no other trustee has anything to say, we're going to have citizens address, and it will be held down to 3 minutes. Chief, you mind doing that 3 minutes? Thank you. And your citizen address will relate to this meeting, which is the Committee of Finance. Any resident want to come up? You have 3 minutes. Everyone, 3 minutes, Chief.
It's going to be a little bit more than 3 minutes with me.
No, sir. It's
yes,
3 minutes.
Yes,
because
it is.
if we do more, with all due respect, Mayor.
Just respect me then.
Mayor, with all due respect.
Okay.
If I give you more than 3 minutes, it would be unfair to let somebody else.
If you give me.
And that's the procedure, Mayor.
If you give me.
So if you would, please, 3 minutes.
If you give me. I just want to comment on several things that you mentioned. And, you know, you originally said it wasn't going to be political, but you had to throw me in there. But first of all, before I go into what I wanted to say, I want to commend Matt Stacy today. He's been here for 20 years and working in this village. Sidewalks. From time to time, we get calls in regards, and even when I'm traveling through the village, we have a number of sidewalks, or we had a number of sidewalks, and there's probably some more out there, that created trip hazards. I've heard from residents in regards to children riding their bikes, falling over the sidewalks. So we take a look at it, and we get it done to try to relieve any type of responsibility or liability, I should say, that may have that may come towards the village. Trees, tree lady, trustee. From time to time, and depending on the weather, because storm conditions and things like that can create a problem in regards to cutting down trees. For the most part, Public Works handle as many trees as they can. Pekarsky, they recommend not cutting down live trees because they also help with, when we get rain, those trees suck up a lot of water. Diseased trees, yes, cut them down. But from on a yearly basis, that budget may change whether we have bad storms. But for the most part, early on in this administration, we did a lot of tree trimming, and we cut down a lot of diseased trees, and a lot of those trees were cut down because of the fact that they jump from tree to tree when we get the ash borer beetle. So we did a lot of work early on in this administration. When you talk about the budget, Yvonne, how many times have I been in your office discussing the budget with you? That's the staff right there. and I'm giving the recommendations, and if I've given this board recommendations, it usually falls on deaf ears and is voted against. So I've discussed this budget with Yvonne, and she's relayed some of my discussions with her, with you, Mr. Kemp, and made some of those recommendations. So as far as the budget goes, I have been in contact with Yvonne Redmond. I don't understand what you're talking about, pilferage of the gas. Because, you know, I think you said we spent $67,000 on gas last year or the year before, and it's been budgeted for $75,000. When I came into office, we had a number of cars going home. I had those cars turned in. I think we're at about $130,000 a year in spending for fuel. So, Mr. Urban recommended a better way of trying to make sure that we don't have pilferage and we don't have people taking gas for personal reasons. So I think where we're at right now, I think we've done a good job in regards to holding the fuel costs down. The street sweeper, you mentioned the fact that this is the first time you're hearing about the street sweeper. I think you were on the board when you approved for the purchase, lease purchase on the street sweeper. So I'm not sure where you're on that. As far as bonds go, when I came into office, we had a bond I think was out since 2001. Matter of fact, we were contacted by the Comptroller's Department that they were not going to release any funds to us unless we made good on that bond, and they forgave a lot of the money that we owed on that bond. So there's been previous administrations, there's other villages that rely on bonds to operate. I'm not saying that we should rely on bonds, but in the occasion where we need to do a bond or refinance a bond, I think I don't think anything's wrong with it. You mentioned the fact of the liquor store sidewalk, and I know you was jabbing at me on that, but part of that sidewalk, matter of fact, the majority of that sidewalk was the village's sidewalk. And I talked to the liquor store, and it was in such bad condition, it was a trip hazard also. I talked to the liquor store owners, and I told them, I said, we're going to replace it, but I want you to contribute half, and that's why they contributed half. It was nothing in regards to a 50-50 program. I want to know how much you spent on your lawyer, and is it in the budget? The attorney that you guys are using, the trustees, some of the trustees, not all the trustees, I want to know how much you spent on them, and I want to know, did you put any money in the budget for that? And why do we have a second lawyer?
You want an answer now? Why don't you get all of it out, then I'll answer it at the end.
Answer me on this one.
I'll let you finish.
I'm just about done.
You done?
No, I'm not done yet.
Okay, if you would, I'll answer your question at the end.
Okay. And the 80, was it $80,000 that you spent on the youth center?
No.
How much was it?
Corrected, you know it's not.
How much was it?
60.
60. What happened?
I'll answer that too after you're done.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. And I'll answer that as soon as the next person comes up.
I want you to answer me now.
Mayor, with all due respect.
I'm trying to respect you.
This is a finance committee meeting.
You're exactly right. And everything that I've talked about includes finance.
I don't want to be disrespectful to you. I don't want to go back and forth. I want to answer.
So you want to answer me after all the rest of the people speak?
No, I'll answer your question once you let the other person, but you've been up there now for at least 6 minutes, and you had 2 questions for me. I'm going to answer them for you very succinctly. Okay, but if you would please let the other person come up and I'll answer your question.
I'm not done yet. I want to know, since we're talking about the budget, I want to know how much has been budgeted for your attorney, right. And I want to know, Yvonne, can you tell me how much is spent so far on the attorney?
And while you're doing that with the attorney, which was what I was going to ask you since the mayor, and that's the same question. Also, he asked what was budgeted for the attorney, and thus far, year to date, it's been $9,000 for the year that we've had him. Is that correct?
We have spent
$9,000. What is the fee for our attorneys for the other 3 attorneys that we have also? We have 3, I believe. Could you give us the amounts of those? And we're not budgeted for them because you don't budget for the attorneys. Is that correct?
That is correct. And
okay, what are those amounts for those 3?
For fiscal year 19, so far, we have spent $121,320.09 on legal fees.
Is that for total legal fees, including all three attorneys?
That is
Or is
correct.
and that includes Murphy,
That includes,
Giannopoulos,
yes,
and who else?
Olson and
Olson.
Sturk, and also Robbins, I can't think of her name, Miss Elliott's firm.
Well, no, Miss Elliott, you subtract 9K from that. Hers is 9,000, you said.
Correct.
So it's about 100 and what? 10 for the other attorneys, correct? Whatever 9,000
Yes,
minus
roughly.
121. I went to public school.
112,000.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Mayor? Because I'll answer your second one, unless you had another one.
No, I just wanted to know,
Because we're really getting into now 8 minutes, and I want to
counting.
give everybody to 3 minutes.
about the youth center.
I can answer that now.
Okay.
As you well know, Mayor, I'm going to take my time on this one because this comes up all the time. You and I agreed about the youth center. As a matter of fact, you tried to talk me into doing a steel building, S-T-E-E-L.
You're exactly right.
And you said, is there any other buildings that you would like to do? And I said, well, Mayor, do you want the building? Because I think I can do something with that building. And you said, well, if you really want the building to do it, let's do it.
No, that's incorrect.
If you really want the building, we'll go ahead and do that building at 145th and Lincoln. That was our you and our conversation.
I'll correct you when you get done.
Okay. No, correct, because I may be wrong.
Yeah.
I don't mind being corrected. What was
You
said.
came up and told me it was going to take about $140,000 initially. And I said, you can build a steel building for $80,000, and all you had to do was put a concrete slab in and bring the utilities in. And you could put a second floor in it. But you were so adamant about doing it in that building, and I told you about the flooding in that building, I told you about the mold in that building. So, oh, Mayor, I can make it work. I can make it work. So I said, okay. And you went in, and you spent that money. I don't understand why you need a bathtub in the youth building.
All right, let me answer that. You were doing fine until you said that you told me about a mold situation in the building. You and I, Mayor, never had a conversation.
I disagree with you.
Let me finish. I won't interrupt you,
Go
sir.
ahead. Go ahead.
You and I never discussed a mold issue in that building. The only time mold or lead came in is after you and I had a conversation about me running for mayor. I met with you for over 6 hours at Wilma's.
Yeah.
In June of
Yes.
about 2 years
You're exactly
ago.
right. And you
And I
told me you
told
wasn't going to run if I ran.
Let me finish.
Go ahead.
Let me finish.
Go ahead.
Let me finish, because I'll let you finish. We were in your place for over 6 hours.
Yeah.
I told you I shouldn't even be in that place. It was
You're right.
during Ramadan,
You're right.
a place that cooks swine. But I wanted to meet with you because our
You
meeting.
chose to meet
If you
me
would
there.
please let me finish, man. I
You chose to meet
listened
me
to
there.
you.
Go ahead.
I chose to meet you there because we wanted to meet somewhere else, but your worker did not show up, so we had to meet at your place. It was myself and Mr. Pearson. Is that right, Mr. Pearson?
He wasn't there for the 6-hour meeting.
Mr. Pearson was there for the meeting, and I stayed for 6 hours.
That was the second meeting.
The meeting that we were there, the three of us were together. And pardon me for taking up your time because I want this to go to 3 minutes, but I need to answer this because now truth is going to be said about this.
Yes, we know how truthful you are.
Well, we don't want to get into a personal attack. I'm going to answer this question. The reason why. Well, that's. You're right. You're right. You're right, Ms. Butler. You're absolutely right, Ms. Butler. So I'll let that go. If he wants to continue to think that I spent $80,000, but it was the mayor that shut it down. Yes. The answer. You're absolutely right, Ms. Butler. Yes, ma'am. 3 minutes.
Good evening, everybody. Board, residents, mayor. I might need more than 3 minutes.
Lord have mercy.
And this is about the finance. Okay. I'm not in favor of taking out a bond. I'm in favor of making cuts and try to increase revenue. We owe the city of Chicago, and this is the truth. This is reality. $8.3 million. We don't want to end up in receivership like the city of Harvey. A girlfriend of mine told me maybe 3 weeks ago that their trash wasn't picked up. Okay? This is real. You can forget all the personalities. Who shot John? This is real. And the residents have to pick up this burden because in 2014, it was decided by the mayor, he didn't bring it to the board, for us to agree to vote on to pay this bill. I have the paperwork. Okay, I'll bring it at the next board meeting and get all the residents a copy because I believe in black and white. Excuse me. It had your signature on it, sir. Okay.
Mayor, would you please let her have her 3 minutes?
I'm not here to go back and forth with you. And also, I want to talk about lawsuits. The mayor also filed a claim against the Village of Dalton and received $23,000 in compensation for that suit with the water issue. Okay? So when we all start pointing fingers and telling on everybody, I want us to look in the mirror and tell on ourselves also. Also, I want to ask the question of the board, the committee, about municipality collections where you anticipate on
MCOA.
Right. And anticipate on $300,000 and it was decreased to $127,000. That's when we send out letters, or organizations send out letters in our behalf where they collect funds. They get 35% of whatever they collect. And I looked over the last 5 years of what we collected, and this year it was anticipated through Ms. Redmond's calculation for us to collect the $300,000, and we decided, Deborah Denton and I met, we went over the budget. You also had $35,000 in the budget for the sidewalks, the 50-50 program. I asked for that to be taken out because it looked like the only person that reaped the benefit from that is business owners. Also, Ms. Williams, that live on Grant Street, came up here and stated that she spent $10,000 on her sidewalk. So why couldn't the residents have the luxury of the 50-50 program? Also, I've asked Ms. Scott that live on 155th in Dorchester, that's in a wheelchair, handicapped, cannot get out of her house. Her sidewalk is tore up, and I've been asking for months and months for that lady's sidewalk to be taken care of if the village could accommodate her. That has yet to be done. But as I ride through the village, all the other, I think it was 9 on the list, plus the $17,000 that the trustees didn't vote on that was fixed. And this senior couldn't get hers done. Also, I want to talk about if you allow me just a minute, if you allow me to speak on the behalf of Kathleen Elliott. The trustees elected her to be our attorney.
Legislative counsel.
Okay. Let me tell you, I voted for that because a judge told our village attorney, Mr. John Murphy, that he could no longer be part of a case because it was a conflict of interest, and he knew it was a conflict of interest. How can you represent the police department on one hand and then crucify the police officer on another hand? So the judge asked John Murphy to remove himself, and so therefore that was one of my reasons for hiring legislative councils, which we are entitled to by law for the trustees to have to represent them. I looked at the budget. I went down every line item myself on numerous occasions. Yes, I did look at it with Marlo Kemp. Also, I have my own budget where I pay my bills. And I am very capable of reading the different line items, asking questions, and I email Ms. Redmond and inquire about certain things on numerous of occasions that I have issues with on this budget. And I am not in favor of borrowing money to pay off a debt, and we are $8.3 million in the hole, and we have to make cuts. Is it personal? No, it's not personal. This is business. This is business when I go out in the street and take care, see about a resident. This is business. This is not personal with me. Then I see a sheet that came out with about the trustees' salaries. You know, I don't know the period of time when the trustees can vote to reduce their salaries, and I don't have a problem with that. It was also made in a statement in various meetings that I take money, Miss didn't take money, and that's an untruth. I prepared myself when I was a young woman at the age of 26 because I prepared ahead of time because one day I was looking forward to retiring. And this is just like this budget. You have to prepare yourself down the line for the next 5 years. I don't have to take anything. I get a good salary from the job that I worked for 30 years, and I made investments. So I don't have to take anything from anyone. And for someone to even think that, you know, they should come to me and let me show them how I manage my money. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry for the blurting out. Trustee Muhammad, although you're acting a little short with me today, it's okay. But one of my questions was, I mean, I know it's not imperative for Mr. Kemp to have been here tonight, but why wouldn't he, seeing that we're discussing a budget that he also put together with our finance director here? I find that to be really a little short. I'm not done. One moment, please. But my question actually is, because we're making necessary cuts, and I'm sorry if this will hurt anybody, but as far as I know, you guys are part-time, is that right? I just don't understand, why is it that you're receiving medical benefits being part-time, seeing you're not entitled?
I'll answer all your questions at the end. So
I'm done.
Okay, so your two questions. Number one, Mr. Kemp. He should be here, correct?
That's not important.
Did you have a question about
Mr. Muhammad,
Kemp?
please.
So you didn't have a concern about Mr. Kemp?
I would rather you answer the question about the medical insurance that this village is paying for you when you're not entitled to it, seeing that you're part-time. Answer that question.
I can let Ms. Redmond answer that, because the statute states, and it was started by, I believe, Mayor Shaw. He instituted the $25,000 per year annum payment, which included Blue Cross Blue Shield. That was here before we came in. But a trustee, at any opportunity when they get first elected, they can waive that. So it's not like when you say you're not entitled to by state statute, we're entitled to just by state statute. There's a primary and a general election. We have what we call 4-year terms. You know, a person can just come and say, we want you to have 2-year terms, and then our attorney pays for that. So when you say entitled to, it's already in the ordinance that we're paid $25,000.
Right. Let me ask Ms. Redmond. Ms. Redmond, is it necessary for our trustees to have that that insurance, seeing that they are only part-time?
The only thing I can speak on regarding that is that policy was in place when I got here 3 years ago.
Okay. So, but it's not necessary then, is that correct? I understand you're saying that the policy was there, was already in place, but it's not necessary, because as far as I know, most trustees in other villages don't get that privilege. I'm trying to see how is it that they become so privileged. And I understand that this has been in writing or whatever, but I think as a resident, I really don't feel that my money should be paying for your medical benefits, seeing that you're part-time. And on top of that, you're not listening to the voice of majority of the people that are here anyway. So I definitely don't feel comfortable with paying your medical salaries, especially after the fact that you don't listen to the people who put you there. That's all.
Thank you.
I'm just a resident.
Yes, ma'am.
and I do have I have a recommendation to the village as far as maybe cutting back and saving some money.
Yes, ma'am.
We have students that have to do community hours.
You mean for an infraction of the law, that type of thing?
Yeah,
yes,
in order for them to graduate, from what I understand.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, we can take some of those students and put them with streets.
Public Works.
And let them earn the community hours without pay to help clean the village up with maybe picking up the leaves and the dirt and the stuff like that. And then my next concern is with the water bill. Now, I haven't seen a meter reader in a while.
How long you been here?
In the village?
A resident here, yeah.
Since 1989.
Okay. 30 years.
30 years. I've been here 30 years. And I live on Cottage Grove. I haven't seen a meter reader, nor have I seen a water bill. I haven't, and I get the mail. If I don't get the mail, my husband gets the mail. The water bill goes over our key ring, because that's the first thing he looks for is his water bill. We got a copy of our water bill, which is exceedingly high for me, just to me, because it's only 2 of us. I don't water my grass. I wash twice a month because it's only 2 of us.
How much is your bill that you just received? You hadn't this is the first bill you've received in 30 years?
No, now, come on, you know, I'm just saying I haven't seen a water bill in a while. Now,
This last, how much is your last bill?
my next bill is due, it's $164.25, which he's going to pay tomorrow.
And you saying that's exceedingly high
For me,
compared to
yes,
what-
it is.
It's
Just for
usually
2
how much,
people.
like $56, $57?
Yeah, something like
What
that.
you can do, as soon as you finish, ma'am, see Miss Batten, and she'll explain to you why that is. But I want to answer your first concern about this young people. They do go to Melanie Fitness when they have that, when they get a fight at school or something like that. They go. I think it might be a liability issue with the Public Works Department. I'm not sure of that. Maybe the mayor can answer that for you, or somebody else.
But is there a program?
There might be a liability issue with them being out there.
There's a program in place. We get people from community service all the time. They go to Public Works. We go out with Mr. Dick.
Melanie Fitness.
So,
No, we get community service students and residents all the time from the courts, and they go out with Public Works and Brian Thigpen, and we have to sign off on their hours. So
can I?
We get them on a regular basis.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. You got
My next question: who can I call regarding this bus stop that's in front of my house? I live 15649 Cottage Grove, and I have a bus stop in between my house and my neighbor's house. Now, they throw beer bottles, beer cans, paper. They dump all their garbage there.
Ma'am, I just want to intervene. This actually, we're supposed to stick to finance, but
That
you can
is
talk.
fine.
You can talk to us about the bus stop.
Okay.
The bus stop
Then my
thing.
next thing
You
is.
had another one. Yes, ma'am.
My last one is, I just need to see and I'll speak with the lady if, as far as my water bill is
Miss Batten, she's right there.
Yeah,
in the
because
purple.
if this is a finance thing, and another thing too, the street cleaner, y'all say y'all just rented
a brand new. No, we got
a brand new one. When will I see that?
Good question. I didn't know we had a new one. I mean, I'm not saying we don't. I didn't know we had.
Some of the things that you mentioned, you may not see. You know, streets, they start like at 7 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, but if you're not looking out your window, the new one we got is very quiet.
Could you talk
But
to
at
her
any
about
rate,
that? Because
I'll
she's
talk to
getting
you.
estimated.
Okay.
That's obvious because she said it's $56. Ma'am, could you see Ms. Batten? She'll answer that for you, for your concerns, okay?
Good evening. Kiana Belcher, Dalton resident. I have a couple of questions, and I'm going to try to stick to my 3 minutes as quickly as possible, and I guess you'll address me at the end. But every head of house came up here saying what they can cut, which is going to affect us as Dalton residents. Nobody has said what y'all going to cut. Now, y'all had something that was implemented where you supposed to give a 10% contribution back. What was asked. Is that correct or incorrect? Or you going to wait to the end? All right.
No, you said 10% contribution from all the trustees. You heard the trustees saying they would give back 10%?
Right.
That's what you heard all the trustees?
I asked you. I'm asking the question.
Okay,
but you answer it at the end. That's
yes,
fine. So, I said this at a board meeting, but Trustee Stubbs just got up here and said she's willing to, if it was a pay cut. Your salary is $14,500. Y'all get more than half of that as an expense, what could be cut. That doesn't have to go through any type of legislator or anything. It can be cut. You said there was a state statute. There's an ordinance that was put in for you to get insurance, but as the trustees, you can change the ordinance like you change everything else. Now, all these cuts, if we just bare minimum took out your expenses, because most of the time y'all get the money and then still come back with receipts asking for it back, we'll get $80,400 from all 6 of y'all. We haven't even talked about the mayor. We'll get $21,000 or $25,000 for health. I'm just saying in general. We'll get that contribution that y'all pay into the MIMRF, which you shouldn't because you're not retiring from here because you're part-time. So there's $109 that can be saved. Nobody has said anything about that. But you sitting here talking about y'all not gonna cut our trees, y'all gonna take away stuff for the sidewalks, which all is affecting me as a Dalton resident. I have a problem with that, seriously, because it's not fair. You can answer my question.
That's it? Okay. You mentioned about all the trustees saying they were going to take a 10%.
It was asked about a contribution, I said.
I don't recall that.
Mr. House,
hold
Trustee
on.
House.
Let me answer for me.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I remember there was a furlough that was done some time ago.
Okay.
Unless you're conflating
Yes,
that with what you're talking about. And there was only a couple of trustees that went to do that. I believe it was Trustee. Oh, you know them. Who are they? Yes.
Who was it? House, Trustee Pearson and Trustee Stubbs had contributed 10% of their salary for September of 2017.
And the clerk, I think the clerk gave something. Didn't the clerk give something back? Okay, but that's the portion that's what you're referring to.
So there were 3 trustees that did that.
Let me finish. I never agreed to giving a 10% to that, because when you say the trustees and the other trustees can speak for themselves on that, and then I'll answer your other one.
All right.
You already know I didn't. Yeah, no.
It was.
At the time there was a furlough that was put in place, and I voted against the furlough. However, with it being put in place, I felt that as the board, if we're going to impose that on the staff, we should do it ourselves.
Thank you.
Okay, you had a couple others here. You said $25,000 in insurance, that we could change the insurance like we change everything else.
It's
I'm
ordinance.
paraphrasing.
It's an ordinance, not a state statute.
That we can change the ordinance for the insurance of the $25,000.
Yes.
Again, all of that can be done once a person is elected. You can't do it in the midterm of your tenure. You cannot do it in the middle. Like, for example,
it's not a state statute,
well,
sir.
whether it's an ordinance or a state statute, you cannot change it in the middle of your term. You can only do it at the swearing in is when you could do it. And that was based on the attorney telling me that when I came into office.
Okay, so this is the 2019 budget, correct?
2018-19
This
budget,
is
yeah.
the 2019 budget that we're going over.
Yes, ma'am.
And there's about to be trustees elected, correct or incorrect?
That is correct. In
okay.
February,
Thank you
well,
very
it depends. If it's February, if the mayor gets his say-so, it may be March.
Whichever way it is.
And then at that time,
coming in,
the
correct?
trustees at that time can choose whether or not to take the insurance or the salary, which is $25,000. Let me make another correct. Let me answer your other correct. You said we get $14,000 and the other in expenses.
$14,508.
The IRS looks at that as income. $24,999, and let me answer your question, Ms. Belcher. $24,999.99. The reason why I know is because I'm on Social Security, and that's the amount that I pay in. So that's the amount that we get paid. That's with the so-called expense account. IRS, the U.S. Department of Treasury, looks at that as income. They don't look at it as some expense account. They look at that as your total gross income.
Trustee House, can you explain why you guys are getting paid your expense included in your salary outside of it being a separate entity?
Ms. Redmond, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. My understanding is the expense account is being treated as income as a, I don't want to say as a way, because we do not return in receipts for it. If we were to turn in receipts, we would get repaid dollar for dollar. Right. But since we do not turn in receipts for things that we do throughout there, it's treated as income to make sure that there's no circumventing paying taxes.
So we give them $13,000, someone's salary. They have no receipt, so they can do whatever they want to and still get a company phone, because it's listed as a income instead of actually putting it at what it is. I'm done. Thank you.
Good evening. I've been a resident since April of this year. I've never come to any of these meetings. However, I watch the meetings on TV on Channel 4. And what I've seen is horrible. It's horrible, my people. And I'm going to say it just like this, my black people, African Americans. I've served 37 years in the military. I just retired, totally 37 years. I just retired on the active side of the military, 27 years, November of last year. I'm 2 years from 60 years old. What I've seen is horrible. And to me, even saying to some of you residents, I know none of you. One lady I see every time she gets up here, Miss Creighton, never met her. You all talk down to her. Some of the residents boo her. No common courtesy toward each other. That's sad. That's sad. And the trustees that sit on this board, if it wasn't them, it's still going to be something else. If they were replaced, it's still going to be something else. And someone else is going to be getting it. And people, as people, we need to come together. Yes, this is really sad. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Three minutes, sir.
It's not going to take that long. I'm going to remain very brief. All I want to mention is we were always budgeted $2.7 million over budget. The only reason we were able to pay that is we didn't pay Chicago Water. Chicago's looking in our account every day now. They can look in and see what we do. The judge has made it very clear. Trustee Muhammad, myself, and Attorney Murphy,
Ms. Redmond,
and Ms. Redmond have been in court. First thing the judge said to us is, why are you holding that Dorchester? And why are you holding Melanie Fitness? Right. You need to get that albatross off and around your neck, because that money belongs to Chicago. So when we sell Melanie Fitness, that money don't come. It's not going to come to us. It's going to be used to pay down Chicago debt. But the reason I got up here is, think if we used Chicago's money to pay our bills, and now we can't do that, we're going to run out of money. We can't budget the way that live the way that we've been living in the prior budgets. We have to change what we do. And God knows how much debt we have that not on warrant lists. I mean, the warrant lists come out, that's telling us what they want us to pay for the month. But how many other bills do we have? What is the true debt of this village? We can't continue to do what we are doing. And yes, everything needs to be looked at, especially what elected officials get paid. That should be changed, but it can't be changed. The salary can't be changed, but other things can be voted on. And so if it can be voted on, then maybe we should take a look at that. But the big thing is, we can't keep spending like we're spending. We're spending way, way over budget. And when we get bills like $52,000 for sidewalks, we got to pay that. We don't feel like we should pay it, but if we don't pay it, we're going to get sued. But where's it going to come from? You can't take it out of Chicago's money anymore. So if it's not in the budget, you don't have it to spend. So everybody needs to pay attention to Chicago, what we owe Chicago. We're saying $8.3 million, but over 10 years with interest, that comes to $11 million. And that's for water that we already paid for. You guys already paid for that water. And now Chicago wants a tax levy put in place to get their money in 10 years. And if we don't give it, if we don't do the tax levy, they're going to come in here and take over receivership. And once they do that, we're really in trouble. And that's it.
Mr. Creighton, did you?
Good evening. I'm just trying to make some sense out of the budget. I'm confused about a couple things. We went over the general fund, but after that, you've got a lot of these Fund 14. My question is, how does that relate to the budget? All the funds afterwards? I got a second question.
And the others.
Yes, all those funds. But my second question is, if I look at page 2 and look at total revenues, year to date, looks like that's May to August, which is 4 months. Is that correct?
Okay. You saying page 2, Mr. Creighton?
Page 2.
Page 2 of 11?
Yes, sir.
What line? Give me the line item you.
Total revenues.
Okay. Yes, sir.
And
and what we have so far, in other words, $6,000. That's
right.
What you're saying. In other words, that's what we should have right now.
Okay.
If that's correct.
And the budget is 18 or 19, depending on who you. So that's, if I multiply that out by 3, we're right there.
$19 million budgeted. Yes.
Yeah, we're right there. But then when I go to page 7, and this is what's got me confused. And I look at year to date. It says that we're in a $1.5 million deficit just over the...
Where we at right now.
Where we are right now. And that's only 4 months.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So...
$1.5 million.
And that, if I talk revenues, that includes the 1.3 or $900,000 bond, correct?
No, if you're talking revenues, what you see on the budget to actual for those 4 months are actually what we received thus far.
Okay.
We have not received anything for that bond.
Okay. Okay, I see it there. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're talking about needing that 900 or 1.3 to erase that $1.5 million deficit is.
No. Okay, so what you're seeing on page 7, it shows a net loss of 1.5 million.
Yes.
Okay. So what that is, it shows all the revenues that we received and then all the expenditures for the year.
Uh-huh.
And that's how you come up with that $1.5 million loss. But what you must realize that is some revenues are not received until the end of the fiscal year. So you won't see that. So in actuality, so for those 4 months, we should have, everything should be at 33% in the perfect world, 33.33% for revenues and expenditures. Some things you won't recognize until the end of the month. At the end of the year. some expenditures you might see earlier on in the year. So if you look at the budget to actual, there may be some expenses that may have already are over the 33%. You may have some line items that are already at 100%, but that's the max for the year.
Is that clear as mud?
Boy, I'm more confused now. But I guess, what is the $1.5 million deficit?
That means that we have spent $7 million. We received $5 million.
Okay. Let me go and think about that a little more, because I'm really lost. And maybe one of you experts can kind of explain it to me later so I'll understand it. Thank you.
Okay. If you would, we're going to get a, you want to use that mic? Hold on, if you would. Go ahead. Okay. You want to do a one-on-one with him, or?
Yeah, I can see what his questions are, and then maybe if there's anything.
Can you want to? Okay, and then you come back and we can answer it publicly, because the public would want to know.
Good evening. I just have I jotted down quite a bit of stuff, but one thing I wanted to ask is that it sounds like, and it's very apparent, that we are in trouble financially. This didn't happen overnight, so my question is, why are we just looking at the budget this closely and not 5 years ago or 4 years ago or 3 years ago? Why now?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. I mean, it's been going on for the last 5 years, and it's now time to fix it.
Well, I would agree that it's time. However, my question is, why hasn't it happened prior to now?
Right. The laser-like focus is being done now, because that's how critical it is now. It was critical the years before, but the years before, it was to me, it wasn't done. It goes back again. It was being patched. It was being patched by borrowing money. It wasn't addressed, in my opinion. Case in point. For 5 years, I was hearing about how other communities don't have the foreclosure problem we have. That the banks would take care of those properties. It was talked about for 5 years. We come up with a program that you may disagree with, others agree with, that something is finally being done. There are some yeses on it and some nos on it. It's the same with this budget. Now that we're finally looking at it, because I think what really prompted this, to me, was this $8 million that nobody's talking about. The $8 million that we owe, that's real, because we have not been paying our water bill. They've been taking that money to pay the bills, transfer funds.
Okay.
So it's been going on for years, and now we're trying to correct it now.
So, let me ask another question. You've been over the Finance Committee for how long?
Off and on. Originally, the mayor appointed me as the finance chairman when I was elected. It was him that appointed me. There were things that were being done to get to the crux of your question. That was being done, and I keep hearing Stan Irving's name being mentioned, where he had a check to write things. There were some things that were done, I'll say for lack of a term so I'm not sued, inappropriately, that was done with funding. For example, taking water from the water department, Miss Redmond wanting to get a bill paid. You know, it would be up to the village administrator to say, okay, we'll pay this bill, but we won't pay that bill. So that went on for years. And now when he left us in, I keep saying July of 2017, it may have been before, that's when we got notice. And I think it was the mayor that told us that the water bill hadn't been paid for months previous to July 17th. Okay. So that means that money that we were owing to, and I'm getting back to Chicago, because that's the
I understand the whole Chicago thing. I really do.
That's what's affected us, which I'm answering your question. That's what's bringing me
I
raising the red flag of what's going on with this 8.3.
I understand that piece of it, but I guess where my confusion is that no one paid attention prior to now. Because let me say this, as a committee chair, I would think part of the responsibility would be to pay attention to things like that. I'm just a comment, not requiring an answer. I just want to bring that up.
Trustee Hunt raised the flag many a day.
Okay.
Trustee Hunt was the chairperson that raised the flag on forfeiting, not forfeiture bonds, for defaulting on bonds. I remember it vividly because I sat right next to him. So there was flags being raised at the time. He was summarily dismissed by saying, well, it's going to be paid by the insurance company.
So if as much vigor that's being done right now would have
And it
been
should
done
be,
then.
yes.
So I think that you have to take ownership of where you failed. Because I think
Yeah,
I honestly
we
think there's a
should.
failure.
Yeah, we should.
But you got collateral damage from people who are losing their jobs, and I don't think that's fair. As you disagree with the bond, I disagree with people losing their jobs. Now,
Tell us where the money's going to come to pay.
let me ask you a question. While you're in disagreement with the bond, is there going to be any bonds used, period? Or will there be any bonds purchased, however it works? I'm not a financial person.
You heard some trustees before, some are against it. We have to do it.
So if you're against it, we're going to still be in debt, right? If you're for it, we're going to be able to pay some bills.
Let me make it real clear, because we would
Let's
not
simplify it. I don't need a dissertation. Just give me a simple answer.
I'm going to give you my answer to your question.
I need a simple
Okay.
answer, please.
We're spending more than what we bring in. That's the simplest I could do it. So what we have to do is increase revenues, do cuts, and get more robust on collections. That's the most simplest
Trustee,
way
I
I can answer.
understand that. I'm not ignorant. I do understand that piece of it. I'm just bringing out points that don't make sense to me. So, back to my points. Next meeting is going to be a board meeting, is that right? Yes?
Yes.
Should it not be the committee of the whole?
No, it's not. We're making that a regular board meeting.
But didn't we just have a board meeting?
We can make a cow meeting into a regular board meeting like it was done in the past. It was done a couple months ago. We can do that.
And is there a reason for doing that? Because you just want to...
We have to make, at a cow meeting, you cannot pass any legislation.
Exactly.
You have to do it at a regular board meeting.
So you want to push these
We have
people
some
out?
legislation that needs to be passed outside of it. We have some ordinances also. You haven't seen the agenda, but there's other legislation that has to be passed outside of the budget.
Okay, so the other comment that I have, and this is really, I'm going to be as kind as I possibly can, because I hear often, this is not political, this is not personal. What it is very emotional. And I think that some of these decisions are being made out of emotion, and you're not looking at everything the way you should be. Now, I know we're in trouble, but if you think about the salaries that you make, because I've done my little research, and Dalton's trustees get paid the most money. Their trustees only get $1,500 a year and no benefits.
That's true.
So when you're cutting people's livelihoods, you've had your livelihood, you're retired, you got your Social Security, your pension, whatever. These people are buying houses in the town we live in and have families, and you're cutting theirs and not considering your own. Now, you say when you're voted in that you have an option to opt out.
Mm-hmm.
You can opt out now. Say, take my salary. Yeah, you can. Sir, you can. Okay. Absolutely, you can.
Ms. Wells, the last thing I want to do is argue with you.
I'm not trying to argue.
I'm telling you what the attorney, John Murphy, told me.
Let's
and
look at it again.
there were others here that witnessed that, because I
Let's look
asked
at it
that
again.
same question, because guess what? I was going to waive mine.
Okay. You can still donate it back then. You make it and donate it back and write it off. There's ways to do things if you have the tenacity to do it.
As well, we've cut in every department. We've cut in every department. We've made cuts in every department.
So when you have an expense account,
we're cutting in the water department.
No, I didn't hear that.
We're cutting in public works.
I know that. I know that. And I know that the entire team that works under the mayor is being cut too, which is going to impact the village as a whole. You have residents that rely on people, and I'm really curious.
Show where we pay for it.
I'm sorry?
Show where we pay for it. Show where we pay for that. Show us where
Show
the money is to pay
where
for
you
that.
pay for it.
Yeah, without borrowing a $1.3 million bond again and again and again. That'll get us through the year. What do you do for the following year to keep those
What you do is you mention a comprehensive plan. That should have been in place when you were elected in. Every chair up here should have a comprehensive plan for the department that they chair. And you should report the
That's not where your
plan.
comprehensive plan comes from, just so you know, not from your legislative body. That comes from the executive branch of the village.
Wherever it comes from.
It's not wherever it comes from the executive branch.
See, now we're going back and forth, and I don't want to do that. You can think outside the box and do things differently. You really can.
Which is what we're trying to do in bringing the budget into line. But that's going to be met with some resistance because there are cuts.
Absolutely, because
Trustee House had a staff of 170 people and they had to cut off half of those people.
I'm not arguing that cuts shouldn't be made.
There are
but
times where
look
cuts
at where
have to
you're
be
making the cuts, though. When I call into the village and I need to get a shot, because Shad works with me all the time, who's going to
Are you
be
going to
that
be the
person?
proponent for the other persons that are let go also, or just the people that you know?
I don't think anybody should be let go, honestly.
But then tell us how we pay for it.
That's why you're elected. But if
And
we,
that's what we're
here's
trying to do
here's the
now,
thing.
Ms.
Here's the
Wells.
thing. You had this meeting. If you had these consistently, without fail, perhaps you can get that input. Perhaps you can understand where some grants might come from. We could do a whole lot together, but divided, we are always going to fall. But I think that if we look at this, and I'm sure you guys going to vote the way you're going to vote, and you know that the residents aren't happy with that, and the will of the people should prevail over everything. And I get where you're saying that we need to make cuts. We absolutely do. But I don't think that this is the right way. I don't think you need to cut everybody. Have you sat down and talked about perhaps payroll cuts? Are they willing to take a cut in salary or go?
Talking about all of that.
Or part-time? What are
We're
you
talking about all of that.
None of that has been talked about in front of us. All we know.
There are things that we're not talking about because they're in the planning stage. There's some internal controls that has to be taken care of.
That's interesting.
Which addresses what you're saying, but everything can't be addressed publicly because it hasn't been discussed thoroughly. But there are more cuts that will take place. There are more ways that we're going to raise revenue. We're trying to reduce the amount of bonds, as Trustee House just said, as opposed to doing a 1.3. Let's go back to the $800,000 bond. So there are different ways that we're doing things, but again, we can be a proponent for one employee, but you got other employees.
I don't think anybody should lose their job.
That wasn't even hired because Ms. Redmond,
I
as
heard
she
that.
stated, could not.
I
and
heard
guess
that.
What? Of all the departments, that's one that I personally think is needed.
I understand that. What I'm saying is that you said things are in the planning stages, but you're about to make a decision that's going to impact us immediately. So in the planning stages, what's going to happen in between a decision for your plan and the decision that you're going to make to cut this everything? So when I need to connect with anybody, and maybe not even a shot, it could be Mr. Steve. He's very instrumental in doing stuff. Public Works we need that, and we're getting it cut. So ponder over that before you make the decisions. You're impacting not just the lives of the employees, but the residents who live here and who pays the salaries. And really consider that you guys are getting paid a lot of money with benefits, which makes no sense because you're part-time, and I don't know too many part-timers that get benefits, medical benefits. So I'm done.
Mr. Kemp, I'm glad you're here because, as you know, there was some aspersions cast against you and that you're coming up for public address. If you could, come on up. And you had individuals sitting in on you want to hear what you got to say.
Okay.
And you don't live here. And this is your budget. And now that you're here, and I'm glad you're here, you know, speak your piece.
So I'll just go through a couple of things. So since nobody knows my background, I've been in finance for roughly 14 years. 11 of those 14 have actually been in government finance. So I know there are other related financial areas, but government finance is a unique bird all unto itself. A car and a truck, a car and an 18-wheeler both have wheels and they both have engines, but they have vastly different functions. And so, frankly, government finance is unique among finances for what it requires. You know, the choices that you have really are very simple, and it's this. You are running short money. You know, it's not I'm running short of money, but it's I'm running short of money and, you know, if it highlights anything, it highlights the importance of actually looking at these budgets every single year. A lot of what has, you know, you have three kind of areas that you're looking at when you look at budgets. You have the revenue and expense, but you also have the issue of cash flow, which is when does your money come in and when can you spend it? So the gentleman who came up here earlier wanted to know about the $1 million deficit. What you're actually seeing when you see those revenues and expenses is you're largely seeing cash accrual. So this is the money that's come through the door, and right now we've spent $1 million more than we had coming in. Now, if you have $2 million in the bank that'll let you do that, that's fine. But if you don't, then you're a little bit short. Now, the one thing that probably was not mentioned is that you all have not received the August payment of property taxes showing up on that piece. So when that property tax comes in, it should alleviate some of the issue that you're saying with the $1 million negative. However, what it does point to is that even if you balance a budget and you say, you know what, I've got just as much money going out as I do coming in, then the problem comes with timing, because as you get to like January and February and you've spent all of your last property tax and your next property tax hasn't come in yet, then you run into money issues. You know, the issues that I saw when looking at the budgets and the audits is that you all have been borrowing money from other funds, and that's problematic. You know, in addition to all the $1.3 million that people are talking about, there was also $1.3 million in an interfund transfer that was recorded by the auditors from one of your TIF funds.
2017, I believe.
Yes, 2017. I think it was the Indilux TIF or whatever it is. That's $1.3 million that was basically taken from the TIF and used for the general fund operations as recorded by the auditor. So that money also has to be repaid, or else all of the other people who contributed to the TIF are going to ask questions. You know, the honest, the goodness truth is that you all are in a very tough space, and you're going to have to cut somewhere, right? You have a budget, you know, right now there's $1.3 million proposed in bonds. There's another $600,000 that's coming from the Dorchester. So that's a total of $1.9 million in revenue that you really, you know, shouldn't be relying on, and that you should have to, you know, get from someplace else. And here's the thing, ultimately, you know, there is one fail-safe way to get all the money back, and that's simply by saying, you know, raise the property taxes. So the question becomes, that's really out there on the table is, you know, that's one way to raise the deficit. So if you say, I don't want any changes to what you have, then you're basically saying you all have the right to raise the property tax levy above the 4.9% and bump that up to a level that is sufficient to provide for operations. Because that's really the basic trade-off, right? The basic trade-off is I have to pump more money into the system to sustain it as it is now. You know, the city of Chicago is basically saying that you can't use their money not only permanently, but you can't now even use it as working cash, right? Right. Which some people, in some instances, when you say, you know what, I have a problem with my cash flow, and it happens. I was at the Village of Hazelcrest, and it happened. You're like, hey, property taxes haven't come in yet. I have to keep my books so I know how much is owed to everything. But you kind of use the rest of your cash that you have as kind of working cash, and you say, all right, I will borrow it and then pay it back when the property taxes come. And that's kind of what happened. Eventually, though, as you kind of tighten your budget down, you get to a point where you have enough money saved that you can withstand the lull. So it's, you know, when you look at the budget, you look at Dalton's budget over the years, it did not happen yesterday, as one of the previous commenters mentioned. And the question as to why they didn't do it 5 years ago is a valid question. However, it has to now start now, because I don't know if there are any other options left on the table. And, you know, there may very well be alternatives to, you know, what's being proposed in terms of, okay, here's how much I have to cut. Now the question is, how do I cut it? There may be alternatives there, but you have to recognize that you can't say, well, we don't have to touch a thing, because unfortunately, as it sits right now, you do. There's no easy way about it. You know, you can debate, you know, whether or not these are the right cuts to be made, but some have to be. They have to have, you have to trim off a fair amount of money, because ideally you would not have to use tax anticipation notes to balance this year's budget, because that money now has to be paid back next year. And either it comes out of your general fund, where you have $900,000 less to spend on public works or whatever, or you wind up having to basically call it a true bond, and then basically it's another property tax just listed in the bond and interest section. So, you know, the bottom line is, you know, finance, you know, one thing finance does have in common is that if you spend more than you take in, you fall in a hole. If you take in more than you spend, you hit a surplus. that's just the common facts. And I mean, it's going to take everything and everybody working here together to get this done. So, I've been here too, looking and seeing what's going on, and I'm like, at some point, your love for this village has to exceed your disdain for each other, and you have to come together and bite a bullet and figure out how to fix it. The recommendations out there is just one such recommendation. There could be others, but what you can't do is allow infighting and the like to keep you from solving the problems that are plaguing the issue. Because I mean, right down the street in Harvey is where things can end up. Right, they basically used their water until they got caught and everything happened to them. So I'm saying we don't have to go that route. You have an opportunity to stop it and change it. Now the good news is, you may not have to do draconian cuts forever, because while you're doing those cuts, you can actually start to try and grow revenue, and eventually, but the first thing you got to do is stabilize yourselves and then start with the revenue growth and stuff like that. It can happen. I saw it happen in the village of Hazelcrest. They had to bite a bullet too. Pay raises for the first couple of years were really scarce, like 0, 0, and 1/2. But by the next 3 years, we were offering 2.5 and 3. And so, you can, if you slowly just kind of take the pinch, and it's going to hurt, but if you slowly take the pinch, I believe it can, it can get better. And really, while I'm not a resident, as many people have been quick to point out, I'm actually a resident of South Holland, and one of the questions I've always had is, I live maybe less than 2 miles away from this village hall, and South Holland doesn't have anything that Dalton doesn't have. It's not closer to Lake Michigan. It doesn't have an expansive business district or anything like that. But and so my thing is that there is no reason that Dalton can't be as successful as South Holland. And rather than people using South Holland as a model, why don't these surrounding communities start to use Dalton as a model of both fiscal efficiency and a way of getting out? Because there are a lot of people who could use the who could certainly use your help. So I'm hoping for the best from everybody here. I've talked to Ms. Redmond, and we went over the figures and stuff like that. And what I said is, listen, I'm not here to espouse somebody's political view. I'm here, freely offering my services to help the entire village, and anybody who comes up with a plan that says this is what works, then I'm all for it. Because, the one thing I don't want to see is your property taxes continue to have to go up.
Hold on a second. The trustee has a question for you.
Okay.
Hold on. The trustee has, and then we'll let you go normal.
Just quickly, and I agree with, I would say, probably 90 to 95% of everything you just said. Previously, when we were talking, I made the statement, I want to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting your opinion, and if I did, I want you to correct it for me. But if my understanding was your opinion is that for this budget, there should be a $1.3 million bond.
Well, what I will say is this: that bond needs to be as low as possible. I know originally we were looking at $900,000. And then it went to 1.3. What I had actually done is looked at several scenarios, one under which it was 1.3, one which it was 9, and one of which it was a hybrid, like 1.1, right? The thing being that you have to slowly kind of walk backwards, hopefully, and get it to a day where you don't have to do it. So, $1.3 million is certainly, that is certainly an option on the table, but it certainly means you have to pay, $1.3 million back at some time in the future. And so, ultimately, and this is how I've always looked at it, we have or you all, because I'm not necessarily me, but you have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers to make sure that we're not basically continually asking them for money either up front or kind of underneath through a bond deal. So if you're saying, a bond deal is absolutely necessary, then it's our job to try to minimize the amount of that bond so that our taxpayers can say, we're not taking as much of a bite. You know, it is going to be a bite on the taxpayers. I mean, that's not, and you know, that's just factual. You know, you want the services, and that's, you know, they want the services, and if they're willing to say we'll pay for it, then that's what they do. And that's, you know, but the thing is that that kind of trade-off is really what we're putting out there. And certainly I feel for everybody who has to, you know, who may possibly be impacted. And it underscores the importance of actually looking at these budgets every year and kind of making sure that you don't, that it doesn't get to this point. It's here now, and I don't know, you know, that the option I presented, as I told Ms. Redmond, this is one option. This is not the option you must take. It's saying, here's the option, but just know that you have this much of a deficit and you have to decide how you're going to fill it.
I'm confused.
So what I'm saying, so here, what I'm saying is,
if I can add, and I'm not saying that, I mean, we understand we have to deal with it. Bonding is not the ideal way. We do ultimately have a vote that's coming up on Monday. The packet presented in front of us has a budget. It has a $1.3 million bond in there as the recommendation. So my ask of you is, are you recommending 1.3 as the fix for this budget?
Well, and what I'll say is this: no, the question is easily answered. So here's the thing: you got to remember, I'm here advising. I don't have a dog in the hunt. But what I'm saying is that that's the option that you all have to face. Do you want to spend $1.3 million on this budget and say that nothing else will be impacted? We will borrow the deficit, or will you say I'll take a little less than 1.3 and say I'll shave off a little bit and maybe gradually get down? That would be, if somebody said, what's my recommendation? I would say take a little less than 1.3, shave a little off of the discretionary money that you have, and then slowly kind of get accustomed to the fact that you have to make some cuts. Because I'll tell you, it's an easy option to say, let me just fill in my deficit by borrowing the money. That's, you know, at some point, if you're going to get off of borrowing the money, you have to start kind of stepping back and saying, well, I have to somehow fill this by making some cuts, because again, you know, all that money you borrow is money your taxpayers are going to have to pay back. So that's.
When you borrow this money, pay off all the debt that you do have.
No, you're not paying.
Okay, now that don't mean that you have to lay off the staff. If you get rid of the staff, then your business not going to run, right?
Well,
so you need to borrow the money to pay your debt out in order to keep the staff, to keep the village running. Why borrow the money? You can't have the staff.
But here's the point. You see, you're not borrowing money to so it's not what you would call.
I know you
debt.
borrowed the money to pay the debt.
Well, you're borrowing the money to kind of cover the expenses that you have every year, right? So the thing is, and again, here's the thing, right? You can say, rather than ask for a $1.3 million bond, you can say, I'll raise property taxes right now by 1.3.
Tax is going to go up anyway, regardless.
Yeah, and so then
so it's on the taxpayers anyway.
Well, this is true, and so what I would say is then maybe, you know, if there was to be an option, is to just come right out and say, you know what, we may have to raise the corporate tax levy greater than 4.9%. That's actually saying, you know what, we know we have an issue, and here's how we're going to deal with it. So
the voters that spoke, the taxpayers in Dalton that spoke, they willing to sacrifice. But I don't want to see our staff, the mayor staff, go. It would go. Why?
I mean, I can't speak to that. So what I'm saying to that is
you recommended that we float a bond.
I didn't recommend. So here's
that's
the thing.
What Mr. Muhammad said.
No, I didn't recommend layoffs or anything like that. What I saw.
We don't have to lay off. So once we float the bond.
Well, it depends on how much of the bond you float. But the point is that you can either. So you have to save some money, right? Layoffs doesn't have to be the only way you accomplish that, but you have a hole and you have to somehow fill it. So
what would be your recommendation? So once we float the bond.
So here's my personal recommendation would actually not to be to float a bond. It would be to go and say, let's raise the property taxes right now, because when you float a bond, you also have to pay interest, right?
Correct.
So if you say, I'm going to get $1.3 million in property taxes, which you're going to get anyway, because that's all a bond is delayed property taxes. So if you just say, look, why don't we raise the property tax by $1.3 million, that actually would make a lot of sense. And, you know, it would be putting the question plainly out in front, because that's what's really happening. One of the things I did when looking at Dalton stuff is I actually did compare it to South Holland. And one of the things I saw was that Dalton and South Holland basically charge the same amount, levy the same amount in property taxes. The only difference is that South Holland gives $8 million to its corporate fund, and the village of Dalton only distributes like $5.5. So, and the other thing is then Dalton's debt is, their debt service is like $6 million a year, and South Holland's is only like $1 and some change. So, you know, in the long term, you really want to kind of wean yourself off the debt, because that actually gives you more money to put into the corporate fund. And not only would you be putting more money into the corporate fund for employees, but you'd also be doing it for programs and stuff like that. So if there was a real recommendation, I would say just go straight for the property taxes today instead of the bond, and then wean yourself off of having to do bonds for it, and just say, this is what I want to do for the corporate fund, and then that'll address the issue too.
Mr. Kemp, good evening. I'm glad you're here, because I was the one that specifically asked, well, where's Mr. Kemp?
I saw you on Dalton Live.
Okay, but let me ask you a question. And I'm trying to figure out, because we are about to let some employees go, and I do understand that we are in a debt, and I agree, we do need to make cuts. But would it be more detrimental to us to make these cuts, knowing that most of these people are going to come back and sue us, which is going to put us back farther in the hole? Also, here's another question, and I don't know if it was posed to you, in reference to the trustees receiving medical insurance who are part-time trustees, and it's only an ordinance which could be changed. Did that question at any time ever come up in reference to saving us money?
Well, I'll say this again, and this is one of the reasons, why, you know, it takes a village to balance a budget, right? It takes input from the staff, it takes input from the department heads, you know, it takes input from the entire administrative section, because, you know, those things could have been put on the table. Now, it wasn't I didn't sit up here and recommend any cuts of any kind. I just said, here is a deficit. The people who work here, and they say, you know what, here's a hole, how can we fill this, and what should we, how should we fill it? Yes.
But my question is, once again, do you think it would be feasible to let these particular employees go? Because again, we're going to be backed with lawsuits. In your personal opinion, is that a good thing to do?
Well, in my personal opinion, I would say that's something that they have to weigh out. I know that when I was at the village of Hazel Crest, we had to let some people go. You know, well, you know, some people did sue and they were unsuccessful. Some people were, because they weren't let go because of a layoff. They were let go because they didn't report back in time for medical leave and stuff like that. You know, there certainly is the potential for there to be short-term lawsuits and stuff like that. But the bottom line is that you all don't have the money right now, right? And so, you know, what has to happen right now is, and this is why I always say, you know, when they ask me to take a look at this, I'm like, you know what? All I can do is look at some impersonal figures, right? Those figures actually live and breathe with the staff that works here, right? They know more than anything. And when I was working at Hazel Crest, this is what I charged my staff with doing. Look, we know where we can save money, and we know where we actually need to do stuff. And so the department heads actually had to step up and say, okay, here is where we can cut. Here's some capital improvements and stuff that we can avoid doing. That's the kind of stuff that you have to do when you get into the nitty gritty of the budget.
I'm gonna let y'all. Just really one quick question from me. You mentioned increase in property taxes. Mm-hmm. Can you do the math to say how much per household would that be? And if the residents are willing, would that be a consideration? So let him answer, and then you can answer.
I mean, so, you know, I'd have to, like, so you have to raise, you know, a net of $1.3 million just for example. So you have a 14% loss in costs. So if you take 14% of 1.3 million, you will get, let's see, that's about 140,000, another 42. So you're looking at about 182. I think 13 times 14 comes out to about 182. So you have another, so that's 1.3 million. You have another $182,000, what you would call loss in costs. So you would actually get a levy of about, close to $1.5 million. So you take that $1.5 million and, divide it by the number of households in Dalton, which, okay, you have about a population of about 22,000, assuming that the average household is made up of 4 people. So you would have about 5,500 households. And so the average cost, if you take that 1.5 million and divide it by, 5,500, you come out with about an extra, 275 or so, 275 extra dollars a year that residents can pay and say, you know what, this is how we're going to balance our budget. And to me, that's actually a very viable way of doing it, because, quite honestly, when I looked at South Holland and said they paying $8 million and you guys are only getting $5 million, you're like $3 million behind them in terms of what they're contributing. And if you had an extra $3 million a year going towards your corporate budget, you wouldn't have a budget issue.
A quick question, or not question, or maybe a statement. You said you should shave the bond from 1.3 to maybe 900,000, and then you say that.
Or I said, or 1.1 or something.
1.1. Now the first budget, from my understanding, that Yvonne put through was a $900,000 bond with no cuts, no cuts. Now you're talking about floating a $1.3 million bond with cuts. So I don't understand. We really, technically, if you're going to float a bond, which this trustee and Trustee Stubbs said they're so against, but once they overturn the veto and approve this budget, there's going to be a bond, and then they have to do a bond. There's no way around not doing a bond from what you're saying. If they got to approve a bond and make cuts, they don't have to make the cuts. They don't have to. So when people say it's not personal, it's not political, it's clearly political, because you do not have to make the cuts if you're going to float a bond. If you're going to float a bond, you don't have to make the cuts. $900,000 bond that she proposed with no cuts. You come back with a $1.3 million bond with cuts. So you understand you're not in here and you don't live here, but when they say it's not personal and not political, it's very political. But they try to fluff it up with nice words. But $900,000 bond that she recommended with no cuts, come back with a $1.3 million bond with cuts. And then tell me it's not political.
Well, so hold on, because let me tell you this. I did not ever recommend a $1.3 million bond. No, let me finish. What I started out with was thinking that $900,000 was the gospel fact. And then when Miss Redmond and I talked, she said, we have the option of floating up to $1.3 million. And so she said, what's this guy's name? Kinkar said that they could actually borrow an additional $400,000. So that never came from me. The budget that I actually put out there, the original budget that was out there, had $900,000 in it, and that's where they wound up having to make all of the layoffs and the like, or the potential layoffs, is because there was only $900,000. When they put the $1.3 million back in, that was really, that half of the budget was really their way of trying to float, or basically the deficit when we did the $900,000 before we did.
You'll be the last question, because
Sorry about that. I meant to say in your professional opinion instead of your personal opinion.
Yours is the last question.
Mohammed,
Go ahead.
I want to ask you this question.
Yes, sir.
All right. I listened to all the cuts going to be across the board tonight.
Yes, sir.
How much did that total up to be? And then you're going to still float that bond. Why do anybody have to be laid off?
Give me your question again so I'm clearing.
My question is to you. They went down line item per line item, and then they made cuts across the board.
Yes.
And you're going to still float a bond. Why do people still have to get laid off?
That's part of the cuts. And there's still a deficit with the bond. There's still a deficit with the bond.
On his recommendation, you're going to float a bond, And you're going to still cut those people?
There's still a deficit with the bond. And
I
to
don't
answer your
understand
question
that.
earlier, and that's the last question.
Okay, I got a question
no, ma'am.
because he wasn't here.
Quickly,
He was not here
quickly.
when I
let me,
made
let me
my
answer,
comment,
Miss.
so that's all
okay,
I'm
hold
saying.
on. We're going to let you. Hold on. In order to, you asked something about earlier. What happened earlier, the levy wasn't raised. We didn't raise the levy, which is a fancy name for raising taxes, number one. Fees weren't raised. We weren't raising fees for water. You know, if we raise fees for water, we'd be run out of here on a rail. And you can't speak for everybody. So when you say let me answer your concern, because you said the residents approve it. We talked to residents. I had a resident call me to your answer. She said they can raise the taxes all they want. And she's 79 years old. So therefore she gets all the benefits of and that's why she doesn't concern. But the rest of us paying $4,500, $4,600, $5,000, whatever, we can't represent everybody to say it's okay to raise the taxes, because a lot of elected officials don't want to raise the taxes. A lot of elected officials don't want to raise the fees, but we're at the point where you got to raise the levy, you got to raise some fees in order for us to generate revenue, and it hadn't been done in the 5 years to get to your part. So now we want to answer your last question for
Right, no, only because he wasn't here
Yes,
when I
ma'am.
made
Go
a
ahead.
comment. He said that he did not propose the 1.3 million bond. Is
Right.
that correct? Ms. Redmond, is that something that you said both of you guys agreed upon?
We agreed upon it because it would bridge the gap. We went through, we saw that there was nowhere else that we can increase revenue.
Okay.
That was ultimately, that was the final our last option.
Okay, and then somebody else just said, in regards to laying these people off, lawsuits may follow. And that has not been proposed anywhere in any type of budgets. With your financial expertise, did you consider that when you sued Hazelcrest for $300,000?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, and I'll be more than happy to answer it. So, here is what happened. I actually had a contract with the Village of Hazelcrest as the village manager. So, what the Village of Hazelcrest, and I wish John Murphy was here so he could nod yes to all of this, what the Village of Hazelcrest was trying to do, because of the contract I had, if I was terminated without cause, then the Village of Hazelcrest was required to pay me money. Now, if they found reason to terminate me and said, you know what, we found some evidence of malfeasance or something like that, then they could go ahead and say you're terminated and we don't have to pay you anything. So, of course, the Village of Hazelcrest did not want to pay the money. And so, once the then mayor, or once the current mayor, Bernard Alsbury, got control of majority of the board, he put me on administrative leave, right? And then he said, all right, now we're going to go ahead and put you and terminate you, right? Which was their prerogative, right? But they were trying to terminate me for cause so they wouldn't have to pay. What ultimately wound up happening is the Village of Hazelcrest put on 2 days worth of testimony from the village employees trying to justify my termination for cause, or for a few select village employees and others. And before I even got a chance, or my side even got a chance to present a defense, the village, the arbitrator said, you guys need to either settle up or we're going to take this all the way through. And the village decided then to settle. As Mr. Murphy called it in the Tribune, he said it was a quote-unquote business decision. My take was that, again, that $300,000 they paid me was a lot of money for a business decision. So if they thought they were in the right, and I would have said go on to the end, because the other option they had was proving themselves right and me not getting paid anything.
It wasn't a personal attack. It was the fact that allocations of money prior to, for even those people in Hazelcrest, had now a lawsuit that was brought upon them, which probably was not allocated in anybody's budget prior to. So that's why I asked you in regards to if these people are leaving, how we address that as a village, because they said that's the village's budget. So I'm going to say we, because that's the village's budget, correct?
Okay, so
that's what I'm asking.
So how would they address that?
I mean, because it's not allocated nowhere right now.
So presumably, if they say, you know, if they're saying here's the threat of possible lawsuit or whatever, then you would have to say, let me allocate some funds. This would be something that you'd have to talk to your attorney about, or something like that, and say, you know what, how much do you reasonably think we can allocate? And it means probably going to court and the whole bit. You know, personally, again, the other option other than raising bonds is just to say, look, you're going to have a levy that's due by December 2018, right?
This year.
Just go ahead and say, look, we'll put in an extra $1.5 million in property taxes, and then that actually addresses a lot of your issue.
So the bond would still go one way or another. Either way, either way it works, it's still going to be a bond.
But here, no, it wouldn't be a bond. It would be property taxes, which is different because then you don't have to pay interest on it.
And you don't see that money until August of the following year.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Okay, anything else before we make a motion to adjourn? Were you done, Mr. Kemp?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Please.
I just want to make a statement.
Okay, hold on, we got it.
Okay. I just want to make a statement pretty much.
Mr. Kemp.
A lot of lawsuits happen in life, period, any municipality. So I can't speak for whatever that happened in Hazel Crest, so I'm not going to speak to that. But I know what we do here in the village of Dalton. Some lawsuits we settle because we cannot afford to fight it. So I don't know whatever happened with his situation, but I'm just saying in general, same thing. I don't know what these people will do, but you might have to settle because the village can't take on the lawsuit. Just saying that for the record.
And since we're talking about lawsuits, I'm involved in another one for the village because the mayor has not shown up.
And another one, Trustee Monroe?
You want to hear it?
And another
We're being sued by the city of Chicago that the mayor has yet to be in any meeting with the judge or the city of Chicago. Tomorrow I go to a hearing with Attorney Murphy representing the village because the mayor is not involved, of some officers that are being sued, the village of Dalton being sued, that I'll be there tomorrow 1 o'clock at the Federal Durskin building to help us where we can get this down. That's not the only place that I've been and represent. Let me finish because we're not taking any more questions anymore. So there are times that the village is sued and it was used that I sued and it was an inflated number, which is not true. It's not true. And with that being said, I make a motion to adjourn.
The only reason you're going, the only reason you're going is because you want to go. I do not have to be in those meetings. I'm represented by our village attorney who has talked with me in regards to these issues. You go there because you want to go there. There's no need for you to go there.
Okay. Let me respond to that. John Murphy, our attorney, asked me to go. Not only did he ask me to go, he asked another trustee to go who could not make it. This is not the only one that I was invited to because, as the attorney said, it would serve well to have a representative from the village. But the mayor has gravitas more than a trustee. And when the mayor says that we would back down anything he suggests, is the city of Chicago going to back down anything that he may try to negotiate to get us a deal on this water bill? Will the fire department, when you negotiate with them on a contract, are they going to back down what your suggestion is? Is the police department going to back down your suggestion? No, at least be present. Attorney Murphy is representing us in these cases, but he has asked me on more than one occasion to come. And what am I going to say? I'm going to say yes to represent the village because I want to see us save money in these lawsuits that continually go on. As attorney, as the
attorney to go, he don't have to go. That's why he pays the attorney.
Again, the attorney asked me to go, and they would, of course, love the mayor to go because it has gravitas in the court. It has. Okay, I made the motion to adjourn.
Second the motion to adjourn.
Okay.
You know that, I don't know.
Okay, do the roll. Trustee House.
Aye.
Trustee Henyard.
Aye.
Trustee Muhammad. Aye. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I'm not gonna see.